Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
William Peterson nodded and glanced at his watch, thinking Kelly hadn't called. Hadn't there been time all day? The night shift had not been easy. 3 surgeries was no joke. The man felt like he was a goner. Abruptly standing up from his chair, he took off his robe, cap and all carefully hung in the locker. Once dressed, he looked around the office once more, corrected the folders with documents. He got up, got on his cell phone, and went out. Surgeon of the highest category Kotovsky liked it when everything lay neatly in its place. Passing the resident, he shouted to colleagues, "I do not have a quiet duty." And going down the stairs, again looked at the clock. Where's Kelly? The alarm beeped. He was about to open the car door. He was called out of breath, by a nurse. "William Peterson. Hold on. There's a major multi-vehicle accident nearby. All the victims are being rushed to us. I can't handle a large number of casualties alone." And with both ORs prepped and the car closed, the man hurried back to the clinic. People needed him. It was already the second day the doctor was on his feet, and it was unknown when it would be over. 21 people were admitted to the hospital. Of course, not everyone made it to the operating room. And as they say, thank God, most of the nurses made bandages and determined in the wards. When the doctor arrived and changed his clothes and entered the operating room number 2, he saw a woman on the table. And when he looked at her face, he cried out in surprise. In front of him lay William's spouse, Kelly. He diagnosed several internal injuries, severe concussions, and a very bruised face. Without wasting a second, the vests went to work. 3 long hours the doctor labored and during this time stopped internal bleeding, did surgery on his leg, removed all the shrapnel from his face. But to be honest, it was even more frightening. It was clear to everyone that if she survived, plastic surgery would be required after recovery. At 5 o'clock, it was all over. 3 could not be saved. They died on the operating tables with injuries incompatible with life. Corver couldn't feel his legs or his back. And when he came out of surgery, William was waiting for him. "I operated on your wife." "What do you mean you operated on her?" "She was in a car accident." Forgetting his fatigue, he flew to the emergency room. Even with bandages and a disfigured face, he recognized his Kelly. The man couldn't hold back the tears. He loved his Kelly more than anything in the world. 18 years of married life, 2 beautiful boys, and love still. He looked at the gauges. While everything was working, his wife was unconscious. Kelly, love. How on earth did this happen? He asked, knowing no one would answer him. The driver of the truck didn't slow down on a curve and the huge truck skidded. It flipped over and crushed several cars, leaving no chance for whoever was behind the wheel. Kelly was already in the driveway of the clinic sitting relaxed, listening to music, and didn't even have time to react and slow down. As it turned out, on the hood, drinking out the windshield. The last thing she heard was the chords of a waltz, and then darkness and silence. William Peterson gingerly touched his arm. But he didn't even turn around. "William Peterson, get some sleep. I've put you in the study." "No, I can't leave her." "Don't worry, I'm fine." But finally, realizing that he was tired to the point where he could pass out at any minute, he agreed to go lie down. When he woke up 6 hours later, he scolded the nurse for not waking him up. "So your wife's still unconscious. How can you help her?" I was surprised to hear the nurse justify herself. "Yes, I guess you're right. Make some coffee, please." Well, she brought him coffee and a couple of homemade cakes, which the doctor swallowed without even noticing. "Maybe you should go home. Kelly's alive. If you need a consult, we'll be in touch." And to everyone's surprise, he agreed. Taking his bag, he left the hospital, which felt heavy with an atmosphere of despair and human suffering. Of course, the doctors kept the situation under control, but they were unable to give any comforting information to the relatives of the victims, who came to the clinic and now looked at the people in white coats with tear-wet eyes, pleading. There remained a swift wait. William Peterson showered at home, then called the clinic a couple of times in half an hour, but always heard the same answer. No change. Alive. The man put the cell phone down on the table and directed a blank stare at it. Suddenly, the phone rang, making the man flinch. William grabbed the gadget, but his son's name popped up on the screen. "Dad, you're all right," he spoke, in a slightly worried voice. "Yeah, Mom, I can't get through." "Where are you?" In a quiet, scary voice, Dad asked. "At the Institute. I'm going home. We'll find a mom and get together. Come to our place. I have something to tell you." When the children heard about the accident, the daughter's eyes widened with horror and instantly filled with tears. "She'll live." Barely audible, the girl whispered, "I can't say for sure, but we have to believe it. The doctors did everything they could. Her condition is stable, but she's not conscious. Now she has to want to come back to us. That's the only way her body will fight back." And he dialed the clinic again. "How's the Catalan doing?" "William Peterson. She's still unconscious." They answered him on the other end of the line. "In our case, we should be glad. At least her condition isn't getting worse," said William, disconnecting the phone. "But trust, of course, we'll be better off." The medical staff watched Kelly Makarova closely until the morning, but she never moved. Her breathing was shallow and infrequent, and her pulse was weak but steady. Consciousness never returned, and William Peterson began to fear the worst of the coma. By evening, he was back in the clinic and ready to start work. After the second operation came to an end, Corver went straight to the intensive care unit. But the nurse could do nothing to cheer him up. Unfortunately, there was no improvement, but no deterioration either, she said. She hated that William was moving away from the operating table like a man possessed. He walked into the resident's room. Couldn't be alone and the best among men. "Let me make you some coffee," the nurse offered, and the man nodded silently. Maria's daughter had put something in his bag that morning. As it turned out, it was sandwiches and 2 apples. He had no appetite, but he ate, realizing that he needed strength to work. Unable to find a place to sit, he went to the emergency room again. For a while, the man stood near his wife's bed, not allowing a close look with the device, and then lifted the eyelid of the right eye. But it was unchanged. Then he put a chair beside the bed, sat down, and took her dainty hand in his big soft palm and said, "To be honest, Kelly, I don't remember how long ago I told you how much I love you. Yes, I do. And I also couldn't do it without you. You should come back, stop sleeping. But you're not a sleeping princess. You're an energetic, creative person. I need you. Me and the kids need you. We miss you very much. Maria, without you, is hitting the sweet spot again, and only you can stop her." He ran his thumb along the inside of her palm. The hand warmed, as if life was being rekindled in it. But Kelly didn't react in any way to his touch. She just doesn't want to come back here, William thought, to the place where she'd been hurt. Dr. Corver should know about such things. In order to escape from pain and suffering, victims go so deeply into themselves that it can be difficult or impossible to come back. 3 more long days passed. William Peterson settled into the clinic. He could no longer tell if it was day or night. He spent all his time either in the operating room or in the intensive care unit. And now he was sitting across from her again, gazing into that dear, once beautiful face. But now she's not vital. Kissing her hands and talking about everything. William was just about to be, despairing, and suddenly felt her hand move. Not much, just a little bit, but it moved. So she can hear him, even though her eyes are still closed. "Good girl, honey, it's me, Will. Can you hear me? If you burned my finger." And oh my goodness, she squeezed. Oh, not so hard, my dear, you'll break it once." He laughed. "I adore you, my love. I await your return. Try to open your eyes. I know you want to see me too." Oh, I tried to lift her eyelids, but it didn't work right away because she had to return to this world as her husband asked her to. The pain immediately pierced her, and she wanted to go back to where it was quiet and nothing hurt. William Peterson realized that it hurt too much to comply with his request. Nina quickly anesthetized the painkiller. "I'm on my way. William Peterson." After the medicine took effect, she opened her eyes and saw this strong man crying. "I'm glad you're back with me. You're a fighter. I've always known that. Everything's gonna be okay now. I promise." William was always not only the soul of the company, but also in the family. He was the center of the universe. He could always make you laugh, encourage you, give you hope. For this he was loved, respected and trusted not only by his colleagues, but also by his wife and children. Children. How do they quietly ask Kelly? They're worried, they want to see you. I want to see them too. Later, my dear, they will surely come. And the car's pretty wrecked. Yeah, forget about that piece of iron. The main thing is that you're alive and you'll be well soon. I'm sleepy. Sure, go to sleep, dear. I'll come back later. And when he walked into the resident's room with a smile at all 32, everyone present realized what had happened. She's back with us. Thank you. And he shook his hand wider than that. A few more times he looked in on his wife, but she was asleep. It was only toward evening that Kelly opened her eyes again. Hi, he said. I'm glad you're back with me. She made an attempt to smile back at him, but immediately grimaced in pain. How do you feel the same? He asked, realizing it was a very stupid question. She wanted to nod, but looked up again in pain. Head. You have a severe concussion and a small hematoma on the right side. He could see the anguish in her eyes. I understand, Kelly, you are in a lot of pain, said the husband sympathetically. They're going to give you some painkillers and you'll feel better. He stood up, walked over to the nurse and said half the usual dose. Let him stay awake longer. The nurse nodded and went to the patient. In the evening, William Peterson went home. He had to check on the children, even though they were adults, but still the children were more already asleep, and he kissed her hand. I'll be back in the morning, sweetheart. Kelly, I heard his words, but to open my eyes was no longer strong. It was hard to escape the morphine. And in the morning, when she woke up, she was surprised to find that her husband was beside her and smiling, looking at her with loving eyes. Good morning. Oh, darling. Hello. He understood her lips rather than heard them. You look much better today, he said. The woman didn't know what was wrong with her face. And William had no idea how to let me know about it. By the way, the kids are coming to visit you tomorrow. William changed the subject. They'd had a long, hard conversation yesterday. The man explained that Mom still has to endure several plastic surgeries, that her face is disfigured. But you must not give the impression you are future doctors. You know that the patient in any case should be supported, gives you hope. It's clear, don't worry, everything will be fine. They endured, and the father was proud of his children. But once Maria got outside the hospital, she got really hysterical. Did you see that? She screamed. Yes, I'm even afraid to imagine Mom's condition when she sees herself in the mirror. Calmed his sister down as best he could. A month passed. The hematoma dissolved. Her head also ached. The cast on her arm was removed. The wound on her leg was gradually healing, but her face. It was the first time she realized there was something wrong with it. When her hands were free to touch her cheek, she looked at her husband in horror. What's wrong with my face? Hearing this question, William Peterson grimaced as if in great pain. Kelly started. It was he to choose the right words, but the woman interrupted him. The mirror, she commanded. I don't have one. Then bring it to me. A mirror now, shouted the woman. Honey, you're not alone here. This is a hospital, not a beauty parlor. You got it. I'm sorry, she came to her senses a little and realized she'd overdone it. William didn't stop by until just before she went home. I gotta go. I'll be on the second shift tomorrow. I'll be there at 3 o'clock for tea. And he turned for the door, not even a goodbye kiss. He came back and was already bending down to kiss her when he heard her. Don't be. I know perfectly well you're disgusted. What's this nonsense? I'll try to sleep at night. And this can all be fixed. I'd like to remind you that a lot of people aren't as lucky as you. And now they're living in a cemetery forever. And you're throwing a tantrum because of your looks. Good night, darling. And he left the room. But I apologized. She shouted after her husband, but still felt as if someone's invisible cold hand had squeezed her heart. She couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about her husband, about the plastic surgery. Now she was ashamed of her behavior. It was essentially not her spouse's fault. William seemed an endless period that it took Kelly to finally come to her senses. It became especially hard morally when she was transferred from the intensive care unit to the ward. She lay in a separate room and refused to go out into the corridor, so, as the woman put it, not to frighten the patients with her appearance. Recently, she saw herself in the mirror, and it was a real shock. And now it was discharge day. The doctor informed her that all the procedures were finished and Kelly could go home. She still limped a little, but it was a matter of time. The only thing Kelly was concerned about at the moment was plastic surgery. She knew several plastic surgeons already, and she had even written down the contacts of one of them. A friend had recommended it, arguing that everyone who went to him was very satisfied with the result. "Kelly, you should have seen him," Betty said, rolling her eyes dreamily. "I've never seen such a handsome man before. I mean, Alain Delon's a bit of a dud, but I don't think men should be so handsome. Maybe that's why he's in her memory when she gets home, and she'll contact him if he agrees. Wouldn't hesitate to go for counseling." After lunch, William came to pick her up, helped her pack her things, put her in a chair, and took her to her car. At home, her children were waiting for her at the festive table, and she wanted to lie down, but she could not offend her favorite children. After all, she understood how hard they tried. Lunch smoothly passed into dinner, and she, modestly saying that she was tired, went to the shower, after which she felt human. Later, William entered the bedroom. "Kelly, if you want, I can sleep in the other room for now." "Why?" "No, I miss you. Go back to your seat." He put out the light and put Yurka under the covers. "That's better. Or he'll lie down in the other room. She won't be so scared. And in general, be patient. Do the operation. Yes, I love you in every way. But I see how important it is to you, and I'm not talking you out of it. Don't save money on doctors. Pick the best one. Thanks, Vitrenko." She lay on his chest and immediately fell asleep. And when she woke up, there was no one home. The first thing she did was to call almost Alain Delon, but actually Simmons Ethan. But she could only talk to his secretary because, as the latter put it, Mr. Simmons was very busy and needed not only her. "How can you get me an appointment for counseling? Would he refuse to work with me?" Kelly wondered. Why would he refuse? The secretary didn't understand. "But my case is very complicated." "Well, just so you know, for Ethan, there are no complicated cases. He's the best. I know, that's why I want to discuss it with him. Consult in a week and discuss." "Okay, let's make it a week from now. What time is 11 o'clock okay?" "Yes, thank you, I will." A week before the consultation, I knew all about Simmons Kelly plastic surgery and the truth. Handsome, excellent specialist. But here's what really surprised her. He's single. Why would women overlook such a specimen? Kelly pondered. Very interesting. And on the appointed day at exactly 11 o'clock, Simmons took her to tell about the reasons that led to this appearance. Kelly waited for his verdict. The doctor examined every inch of her face long and meticulously. But even after such a close examination, he did not jump to conclusions. He looked through a magnifying glass for a long time, scrutinized every orb. Then he took the photograph and set the date of the operation in a month. Before that, to take all the tests. "Tell me honestly, Ethan, how much chance do I have of regaining my former beauty?" "I'll do everything I can." And he took another hard look at her face. They said goodbye to the doctor. She walked out in the hallway. Her phone rang. Looking at the screen, the woman smiled. It was William. "I just came out of the plastic surgeon's office. Surgery after a month. He promised to return everything back to the way it was. I'm very happy for you, dear," for she was the only one who was silent for a second. "It's very expensive. We can pay for it. Don't even think about it. The money is my concern." And Kelly immediately calmed down. At home, Kelly surfed the internet every night looking for information about the Simmons. But all the reviews were positive. Probably somewhere in the back of her mind, she wished she could find something not so enthusiastic about the man. But it was all to no avail. Women all as one described what a professional he was in his work, and how after the operation their self-esteem returned to them. And one evening, while Kelly was lost at her laptop, her husband's voice echoed behind her. "Who's that handsome guy you're scrutinizing?" "It's not handsome. It's my plastic surgeon." In an even tone, she replied, "I'm just familiarizing myself with his work." And do you know what conclusion I came to? The husband looked at Kelly expectantly. If it's not Photoshop, then he really is a magician, does incredible things. And I really want to be on his operating table. But he doesn't like my test results. Well, I think you'll make it. William smiled, kissing his wife on the top of her head. The doctor knows what he's doing. I always respect a serious approach. Any self-respecting doctor would value two things: patience and reputation. And the next day, Kelly was contacted by Simmons' secretary and asked her to come in for a consult with the doctor. The repeat test results came back. The cab pulled up to the clinic at 9 o'clock, and she saw Ethan closing his car. It was the first time Kelly had seen him not in a robe, but in a perfectly fitting suit. The gray-colored shirt and tie that had always been an important accessory to a man's toilette caught her eye. Tied in a knot, working as a fashion designer, she'd been interested in that in her day, and hugging himself to the cab she was getting out of, he gave her a hand. "Good morning," he said, and graciously let her pass in front. Kelly appreciated the morning Ethan. She could smell the light and very pleasant scent of his toilet water. It was a scent that had mesmerized her even last time. Now it had become very familiar to her, as if it had accompanied her since long ago. She didn't stay long in the hallway. "Come in, Kelly." He had already changed into his usual snow-white robe, under which he wore the same snow-white t-shirt. He kept peering at her from head to toe, and noted to himself that the woman was quite interesting. "I have good news for you. The repeat tests are normal, and we can set a date for the surgery. But there's less good news. The surgery isn't for another 2 months. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I'm a little behind schedule." He saw her distress and rushed to reassure her. "Don't feel bad, Kelly. Deadlines are relative. 2 months is if you stick to the schedule. But there are always force majeure circumstances and patients ask to reschedule, in which case I can do your surgery sooner. Just be ready at a moment's notice." The man really wanted to cheer up this beautiful woman, so he suggested, "Maybe for a cup of coffee, there's a lovely cafe nearby. Aren't you in a hurry for another surgery?" Kelly wondered. "No. The last day of the month is report day. No surgeries are scheduled on those days. But let's go." But Kelly shook her head no. "You don't go out in public with a face like mine. You just spoil people's appetites. And to be perfectly frank, when I hear you say something like that, I feel like you're mocking me." "Not at all, Kelly." "Well, then it gets a lot worse. Goodbye. I'll look forward to hearing from your secretary." And she quickly left the office. 2 months, the woman pondered on her way out. That's an eternity. Maybe she should consider other doctors with less busy schedules. So once home, she started looking for other clinics. She liked 2 more. And the very next morning, she went to one of them. The doctor welcomed her warmly, examined her face at once, and offered to do the surgery the day after tomorrow. "But do I have time to take all the necessary tests?" asked a stunned woman. "Are you not feeling well?" surprised the doctor. "No, but then I see no reason for a thorough examination. Let's do a blood test for inflammation. Thank God we have our own lab. So we'll have the results in a couple hours, that's all. So do we have a contract?" Kelly didn't say anything. Her inner voice told her that wasn't an option. The doctor's examination was not as thorough as Simmons. Didn't order any tests. And the surgery the day after tomorrow, it's all too soon. As William would say, not a serious approach. "You know, I decided to consult my husband again," she replied after a short thought. "Good," the doctor agreed. Already with less enthusiasm. Next clinic. Kelly decided not to go. "No way," she said to herself. "I'll wait. It's better that way." A week later, Simon got a call from the clinic. "Kelly, doctor, I'd like to see you. Can you come down here, please?" A couple hours later, she was at the office. "Come in, Kelly. I can tell you something. The patient who was supposed to be in surgery the day before yesterday has unfortunately fallen ill. That's basically what I called the circumstances." He said something else, and she thought she was glad to be with this man. Ethan Simmons' great company, especially when there's good news. "Kelly, are you listening to me?" Yeah, sure. The surgery's the day after tomorrow. I honestly couldn't hear the rest. And then I'm gonna invite you back for coffee. Let's go and sit in an outdoor cafe. where it's less crowded and nature distracts from the attention to the customers. Well, okay, she put on again huge black glasses, lowered her bangs, tacks, and said, "I'm ready." Into his huge car she got in quickly so no one would see her. The car smelled of leather and toilet water. Passers-by and stores flashed outside the windows. She didn't even ask where he was taking her. It didn't matter to her now. They sped through the air while obeying the rules of the road. Once on the highway, the car picked up speed, but quickly came to a stop, reaching a scenic area. "I don't know why," Simmons muttered as he helped Kelly out of the car. "But this little cafe makes mind-blowing coffee. It's worth the drive so far out of town." They left the cars on the curb and took the outermost table. And Kelly sat with her back to all the customers, even though there were only two, a couple in love who didn't need anyone but themselves. "Are you comfortable?" "Yes, very nice and relaxed. I just have to make sure. Is the coffee really that good?" "You bet." The coffee was indeed excellent, and they drank 2 cups each. Then a brownie, which Kelly couldn't refuse. And then the conversation, which dragged on, and there was no desire to rush anywhere, only to listen. They felt they were becoming more than doctor and patient to each other. It was both joyful and frightening at the same time. Will and the children were waiting for her at home. And the next day at 9 o'clock in the morning, William Peterson drove his wife. Cosmetology went to the clinic. "I myself want to look at the doctor, in whose hands I give my treasure," smiling, said William. He did not go into details that he made inquiries about this clinic. The reviews about Simmons were indeed good, but he wanted to have a look at the clinic itself. Inside, everything was respectable. The secretary is a pretty girl in a short robe. Everything was as it should be. Ethan walked towards them. "Good morning, Kelly." "Morning. I'd like you to meet my husband, William Corver. Your colleagues. He's a top-notch surgeon." Simmons extended his hand. "Pleased to meet you." William nodded, noting the handshake. Why did his heart sound like that? What could have alerted him to this man? The man didn't understand. Kelly calm. "What about him?" "Thank you, Will. I'll take it from here." If possible, William turned to Simon. "It's better to use a local anesthetic. She's been under a general recently after major surgery, and her heart is not a fiery engine." "I'll take it under advisement," Ethan replied. "How can you do that?" "Give me a call." William asked and kissed her. Ethan watched the whole thing. "He loves you," he said softly as the door closed behind him. "I love him too. He's a wonderful man. And as I said, a surgeon by God." "Okay, Kelly will show you to your room now. Surgery's scheduled for 11 o'clock. I already told you we're not going to get everything done today. It's too big a lesion, so don't expect me to take the bandages off in a couple hours and you'll go to your surgeon. Just be patient." "Okay, I got it." At exactly 11 o'clock, they came to pick her up and escort her to the operating room. It was a small, clean, and bright room with all sorts of equipment and instruments. Dr. Simmons was already there. "Help the patient to lie down on this table," he asked the nurse. And when she lay down, wearing a mask, "I'll check." "Ready?" "I think so," the woman replied, and he nodded to the anesthesiologist. The local anesthetic was slowly starting to take effect, and Kelly stopped feeling her body. From the shoulder up, she couldn't feel her head, as if it didn't even exist. The bright, shadowy lights of the operating room were shining directly into her eyes. The doctor bent over her so low that she could see the color of his eyes and his smoothly shaven and shaven face. His eyes looked confident, and she felt at ease. Everything was going well. Talking to her, he spoke to her. "Don't worry, everything will be fine. Just be patient a little longer. I think that's enough for today." Talking to her, he did not stop his work for a moment. His hands were plowing in front of his eyes, and she was interested in watching him. The operation lasted 3 hours. "Sleep on your back. Everybody rest." And she was wheeled to her room. And he sat up again. It was more work than Ethan had anticipated. But this was an unusual case. It's not just chin or eyelids. There really was jewelry work here. The next morning, he visited Kelly in her room. "How are you feeling?" "Sleepy." "Then get some rest. When's the next surgery?" "But the plan is 5 days from now." "But it depends on how you feel." He left the room and she was asleep. William called in the evening and they had a little chat about her well-being and the children. 5 days later, Ethan began the next phase. Kelly wasn't nervous this time because she knew what was going to happen. The feeling was familiar, and she looked up at him and saw his smiling eyes. "I see you're not scared at all. That's wonderful. You've survived one day in particular. Today is the second. You probably don't know why these days are special, do you? Well, I'll tell you because together we've taken a step toward a new face without scars and terrible cuts." She saw his eyes smile and covered her own. When she opened them, she was already lying in the room. Touching her hands gingerly, bandages, sank back into sleep. And in the morning, Simmons visited her again. "How are you doing?" Kelly's face was mined, but her eyes, looking through the snaps of the bandages, smiled. And she gave him a thumbs up. He smiled back. "Be quicker this time. We'll continue until the day after tomorrow you'll rest. And then we'll make you beautiful. And this is for you, my employee put in the vase brought red rose for your excellent behavior in the operating room." One small step at a time. And William was inching closer to the day that would become Kelly's 3rd birthday. As soon as he arrived at the clinic, the first thing he did after putting on his gown was to rush to his patient's room. Like a magician pulling a flower out of his sleeve and giving it to her. He didn't like her very much today. She seemed a little sluggish. "How are you feeling?" The doctor asked. "Yesterday I was fine, but at night. And at night I felt cold. I think I had a fever. Did you inform the nurse about it?" "No, she hadn't gotten to me yet." "I had a fever, but a slight one. This infection scared Kelly." "I don't think so, but it's worth monitoring." She was wheeled into the OR in a wheelchair. All the stitches were clean. There was no inflammation at the surgical site. And Simmons breathed a sigh of relief. "Are you in any pain?" he asked. "No, nothing. Just a slight fever. Let's wait and see. I'll stay at the clinic today to make you feel better. Or maybe you should call your husband." Kelly offered shyly. "Don't you trust me?" "Well, if I didn't, I probably wouldn't be lying here." "Well, that's great. I think you're overly stressed. Stress can also cause a fever." So he asked the nurse to take the patient to her room when he came in after lunch. She was asleep. Ethan sat up for a while beside her. Her breathing was even. He touched her hands. They were warm. He had a circumferential facelift surgery today. He had to get ready, and he so hated to leave her. But work came first. It had taken him 45 years of his life, since birth, to become Ethan Simmons, a man admired by women and envied by other surgeons. But men admired him too. It was worth getting to know him. He had many friends among women and men. If he was an enemy to anyone, it was a ruthless one, because circumstances forced him to be so. But even those who envied and hated him could not deny him respect for his golden hands. He was a strong man, ready to fight to the end for what he believed in, and never abandoned his friends. His character was complex, and not everyone could stand him. That's probably why he reached such heights. Ethan's appearance was as impeccable as his reputation as a plastic surgeon. Tall, slender, gorgeous black hair, and with blue eyes that could radiate love and steel, depending on the circumstances. A slight unpleasantness conveyed his appearance and already sexy look. Unmarried. He was only because no woman could stand his work rhythm and the presence of so many beautiful ladies at work. To achieve what he had now, he had had to work hard and sacrifice his family. Kelly was therefore understandable. She looked like so many other women at Simmons with adoration. For today, he almost doubted himself. The temperature of his favorite patient confused him. The man was already ready for surgery when a nurse helped him lie down on the operating table. Another patient. An hour and a half later, he returned to Kelly. She had just opened her eyes. "How are you feeling now?" "I think better," she answered in a slightly hoarse voice. He was on his way out of the room when Oli's phone rang. "Will, hello." "Hello, my love. How are you doing?" "Yeah, it's going slow." "Don't worry, guys. We're fine. Can I visit you?" "Honey, I miss you." "No, Will, I'm in a state where there's nothing to see." "I'll meet you at home." "All right, what do you say?" She thought he was offended, But she still felt very bad, so she didn't want to upset him. In the evening, Simmons visited her again. He never went home and took her temperature, which was almost normal. They talked for a long time, both marveling at how pleasant each other's company was to them. They turned out to be very different, but it was all the more interesting to talk. He left her around midnight. "Good night," the doctor said. "I'll come and see you in the morning before I leave." "I'll be waiting," she replied and fell asleep with a smile on her lips. And when he came in the morning, she was very surprised. "Are you without a flower today?" she asked. "I see you're in a good mood." "Yes, without a flower. Tomorrow there will be a bouquet for that. Let's change the temperature." "I already measured it. It's normal." "But to be honest, you scared me, Kelly. I thought I'd become a lousy surgeon." "You call yourself a compliment." "Well, a word of endearment goes a long way with a cat." "No, I'm sorry, the cat. You're an excellent surgeon, Ethan. That's why I'm here." Thank you. You've put me at ease." And he leaned over and kissed her hand. Today was Kelly Makarova's last surgery. She's been tired for the past 2 months. The woman had undergone 5 surgeries, short and long, but each one brought her closer to her new appearance. She didn't see herself in the mirror and only believed the doctor's words. "Everything is going beautifully. I am satisfied," he told Kelly. One day, William himself called Simmons and, introducing himself, asked permission to visit his wife. "I won't be long, I promise. I've only heard her voice for a month and a half. Do you miss her?" And there was a note of jealousy in his question. "Is it allowed or not?" William inquired, letting it pass his ears. Not exactly the doctor's correct question. "Of course, come in. I'll leave a pass for you." The nurse kindly escorted him to Kelly's room. "Hello, darling." "William, how did you get in here?" "My pass." "How are you?" "It's all tied up for now. But the doctor says it's going well, and he's pleased with the result. But the important thing is that it's pretty." "Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. You don't know how much I want to go home." "Why not?" "I do very well. We all miss you." "I miss you too." He completely forgot about the flowers he brought her, put out fruit, her favorite chocolate. "How's work going for you?" "What, maybe I have a new one, saving people every day, every hour." Sometimes I get the impression that people don't like themselves at all and don't value their health. How many people end up in the clinic because of their own stupidity? It's amazing. All this time he held her hand and stroked her palm with his thumb. She thought he had more gray hair and looked a little tired. "Are you from home?" "No, I'm after night duty and 2 night surgeries. I've noticed that I'm not pretty." "No, you're always handsome, even after night duty." He kissed her hand. "When the doctor gives you a prescription, he says first I said we'd take the bandages off, and then we'd see what happened." William would have loved to sit and talk to her some more, but he promised not for long. "I'm going to go. Kelly will call you tonight. Love you. Thanks for stopping by. It was good to see you." He put the bouquet in a vase where a white rose was already standing. The husband didn't ask where it came from. He didn't want to embarrass his wife, and he was pleased to realize that his wife liked other men, but no more than that. And in the evening, William called to say good night. Simmons came later, and they talked again until midnight. "We'll be saying goodbye soon, but you can always call me if anything goes wrong." "Well, if you count on that, I'll never call you," Kelly smiled. "Thank you. It's my pleasure. Can I just call you for a chat? It's a deal." A week later, she was invited to the dressing rooms. "Have a seat, Kelly. We're going to remove the bandages." When all the bandages had been thrown in the hamper, he scrutinized every inch of her face, like a sculptor forming new contours. "You know, I'm very pleased with my work. It couldn't have been done better. Quickly hand me the mirror." Kelly's voice was clearly impatient. "Kelly, I warn you, the face is still in the revitalization stage. There's some swelling and some beauty, but it will pass with time. A lot of work has been done. You just have to be patient for a little while longer. At your follow-up appointment in 2 weeks, you'll have your stitches removed. They'll be visible for a while too, but again, it's only temporary. Trust me, you heard me." "Yes," hesitantly, she said. Only then did he hand her the mirror. When she saw her face, she looked at him and tears flowed. I don't know what you are satisfied with seeing this nightmare, but there's nothing left for me to do. How can I believe you again?" The tears rolled like peas, and she couldn't even contain herself. "When can I go home?" "Well, we'll observe you for a week," she interrupted him. 3 days, I'm gone." He didn't want to break up with her, but he realized that he wouldn't be able to keep her for the rest of his life anyway. So he said okay. All 3 days she lay facing the wall. And when he came in, he talked to her back. After 3 days, the swelling had gone down considerably, which made Kelly very happy. But the beauty still held. The night before, she called her husband to tell him she was being discharged. "Can you pick me up?" "Just not first thing in the morning. 12 o'clock would be fine." "No, I want to leave early." "Okay, I'll call a cab. I'll meet you at home." In the morning, she packed her bag, checked all the drawers to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything, and headed for Simmons' office. "Ethan, I called a cab. I'm leaving for home in 15 minutes. "Okay, hold on. It won't be long before the discharge papers are ready." He handed her a document. "I wish you a healthy Kelly. And don't ever come back to us again. Thank you for everything you've done for me." The woman didn't expect him to hug her, and she sighed again. The same delicious perfume enveloping her in his car. "Give me your bag. I'll walk you to the cab." When they left the clinic, the car was already waiting for her. Opening the door, he helped her in and waved her in, but happy. It was the last day of the month. He had paperwork to do, as usual, and there was a lot of work piling up, but he didn't feel like doing anything. "I've gone home," he told the nurse. "We have 2 surgeries tomorrow." "Okay, Ethan." The man drove home in a terrible mood. He missed her already and berated himself for not giving her a ride home himself. When Kelly got home, there was a return apartment waiting for her, dinner prepared. Both kids hadn't gone to the institute, getting ready to see their mom. She was happy to see them, cradling them in her arms. They became quite grown up, but most importantly, the children were healthy. "Why did God send me such happiness?" Looking at them, Kelly said. Lunch turned into dinner, and the family gathered around the table and couldn't get enough of talking. William was happy to see the whole family together. No one was paying attention to Kelly's face, and she had forgotten what it had been like to see her own reflection in the mirror. The children scattered to their rooms, and William talked to Kelly about everything. When the house was quiet, she sat at the table and enjoyed the comforts of home. And in the morning it was getting late. William closed the windows with curtains to keep the sunlight out of his eyes. Thus, he hoped to prolong his wife's sleep, but alas, the day was coming with the noise of cars, sunlight, and the voices of the boys in the kitchen. A little lower. In bed, she got up without putting on her robe, and Kelly wandered around the apartment in her nightgown, enjoying the freedom. Taking a mirror in hand, the woman, carefully impersonating a doctor, examined her face. The swelling was almost gone. There was only a little bit left to beauty. Of course, a great transformation was visible. Now it was even scary to remember what had happened to her face. She was knocking back her coffee when the phone rang. Looking at the display, she saw that it was Betty. "How are you doing? Are you beautiful already, or did the doctor's office not live up to expectations?" "Hello, Betty." "No, the doctor is wonderful. Everyone loves him, and I'm one of them now. He's very competent, and I believe every word he says. I feel great. Thank you for the advice to go to him. And what kind of handsome man did you appreciate?" "Yeah, he's an interesting man. I can't argue with that. But your will is just as good. So you're the envy of the world. I guess you're right about that when you're supposed to shoot in 2 weeks. Great. So we'll set up a meeting later. Everyone can't wait to see you refreshed." "I agree. I miss you guys too." 2 weeks went by fast. Kelly rested, regained her strength, and waited for a call from the clinic. "Hello, Kelly. This is the Simmons Clinic. It would be convenient for you to arrive at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." "Why not in the morning?" "Ethan has a surgery, and then he'll take care of you." Okay. I'll be there." Simmons purposely rescheduled the surgery for the morning so he could take care of Kelly and then take her out to a coffee shop or restaurant to celebrate the successful completion of the surgery. He tried to dial her phone number 14 times in 14 days and then put it off. Speaking of himself, he said he could not interfere in a family where the husband loved his wife so much. It was visible to the naked eye, but he was drawn to her like a magnet, helped by work, and he forgot for a while. Tonight he would finally see her. At exactly 200 hours, she knocked on his office door. "May I?" Yeah, come on in, Kelly. How are you feeling?" Fine. Let's go to the OR." While he put on his gown, mask, gloves. The nurse helped Kelly change and lay on the table. Everything was already familiar, the light of his face quite close and the lights in his blue hair. There was going to be a little complaining. A little unpleasant, bear with me. There will be a feeling of skin tightness afterward. The slight discomfort will pass quickly and you will be a beauty in a month. All this he told her without stopping working for a moment. When he was done, the nurse nodded and she did her part. "You can all get up now," he said to Kelly. The nurse helped and walked out of the operating room. "Kelly, do you have any urgent matters to attend to?" asked the doctor without looking at her. "No, I'm completely free." "Then let me invite you to celebrate the end of our collaboration." "I agree," Kelly replied immediately. "Feel free to go to the restaurant. And you won't be embarrassed with me," she smiled. "Of course not." "Well, then I'm not ashamed either." At the restaurant, they took the farthest table. "Kelly, you look so beautiful, and that suit looks great on you." "Thank you." Offering her hair, the woman replied. It was lunchtime, so it was time to eat. "What can I get you?" he asked. "I want a lot of vegetables too." "That's fine. Then I'll have the veal with vegetables too. You can have some wine if you like." "I'd support you too, but I'm driving." "All right then, red dry." "I'm flying to London on Monday, Kelly. I'm going to a conference for plastic surgeons. There's always a lot of interesting stuff there. I took pictures of you and 2 of my other patients. I'll be bragging. Let me know how it goes. Do you really wonder?" Ethan looked at her in surprise. "Of course I'm curious if they like my picture." Ethan laughed. "I can tell you right now that they'll like it." Glancing at her watch, she exclaimed to Ethan, "I have to go." "Okay, I'll give you a ride." He showed the waiter. He paid for his lunch and, pushing Kelly's chair away from the table, helped her up. He took the longest way to her house. "Well, here we are," she said with regret in her voice. "Thank you again for bringing me back to life." Simmons opened the car door and helped her out and said goodbye. She looked after his car and waved. A month and a half later, they met at a conference of surgeons, but already in Russia. There was a plenary session, and then the surgeons went to their sections. They bumped into each other at the entrance to the hall. "Hello, Kelly," and he shook hands with Vitaly Peterson. "How are you feeling?" "Fine. But I'll be fine soon." "And you're interested in surgery now?" "Yes, I often accompany my husband to such events." "That's commendable," and he let her go on ahead into the room. The Orlovsky spouses sat somewhere in the middle of the hall, and Ethan had a short speech at the plenary session and a large, detailed one at the plastic surgeons section. He had to talk about a trip to England. A month later, Kelly went to work. All the sick leave at her own expense was over. She missed her favorite job and the people she had spent 9 years of her life with. Kelly was a good fashion designer. Her success as a fashion designer was determined by her personal qualities. She wasn't afraid to say "I don't know," and she loved to learn. Her innate artistic taste, imagination, and flexibility of thought helped her in sketching. She was an innovator. She listened attentively to fashion trends. She was fond of new technologies. The woman did not like to work with ready-made sketches, which were created by designers. She did everything herself. In her models, you could feel the hand of a professional. I adore her chosen field. And every time she looked forward to the upcoming fashion show, she could already see their models being sold out in the stores. Whatever she did at work, she loved it. She was passionate about her work. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, she remembered her doctor, and her heart began to beat in a purified rhythm. Kelly considered herself a happy mother and a loving wife, was perfectly content with life and her marriage of almost 20 years. Those years, from the moment she married Vitaly, flew by like a blink of an eye. Very quickly, they became weather parents. Therefore, for 6 years, the young mother was engaged with the children and the house, and it suited her quite well. Household chores never seemed burdensome to her. She was never annoyed by the need to drive and transport her children from daycare. Now that the children were grown, she could do the things she loved to do. But it bothered her to think about Dr. Simmons too often. He missed her dearly, too. He would go to model shows and see her there, always passing the bouquet through someone, but never leaving a note. Yeah, he didn't need one. Kelly knew who the gift was from. Started looking for him with her eyes, but she couldn't find him. She tried to call him a few times, but something stopped her. They met again at the fundraiser and ran into each other in the check room. "Good evening," Simmons said. "Didn't you and I often find ourselves looking at Ethan, then Kelly?" William inquired. "I prefer to do it more often," Ethan replied. He tilted his head slightly. Kelly watched them from the side. He was tall, slender, each handsome in their own way and both excellent surgeons. "Will, what are you doing? Doesn't he have a right to be at this party? Who do you think you are?" "No, he's just not looking at you like a doctor." "Well, that's right. He's not my doctor anymore." "Don't be ridiculous. You're hurting my feelings." Ethan tried to keep out of the guy's sight, but as fate would have it, they kept running into each other at meetings and conferences. It was like she was testing them on purpose, making their hearts beat faster and blood rush at a frightening rate. They'd almost bumped heads once in a restaurant. Ethan glanced over at Kelly and with a nod, made his way to the table where a lady was waiting for him. Why did Kelly's mood immediately sour? Why did she find the woman so unworthy? Ethan. Asking herself these questions, she didn't even try to answer them. And so a year passed. The Simmons Clinic flourished. He was even forced to take on an assistant to a promising young surgeon. At once it became easier, and he wished he had done it sooner. For the spring model show, he showed up with the same lady. He was afraid that if he was alone, he wouldn't stand for it and would approach Kelly. But he realized he had no right to do that. And she looked backstage and searched for him with her eyes. And finally, she found him. He was sitting directly across from the model's exit, and Kelly saw the same lady next to him. No sooner had she pouted her lips than a bouquet was brought to her. Again without a note, but again she didn't need one. The woman already knew everything. She quickly grabbed her phone before she changed her mind and dialed a single word. "Thank you." She watched him from backstage. He opened the message, smiled, and hid the phone. But the smile, she thought, was sad. It had been a year and a half since the surgery. Looking at her face, she thought it had always been like that. That morning, she was getting ready for work and putting on light makeup. It was quiet. The kids were getting ready for the institute, and Maria Mom's sudden shout of "Where's my wallet?" made Kelly startled. Her hand trembled, and she scratched a piece of skin on her face with her fingernail. Clamping the wound with an alcohol-soaked cotton pad, she hailed a cab and drove to the clinic. Simmons they met in the hallway. Something was wrong. She put the disc away. She got the disc. "I accidentally nicked it with my fingernail. And I don't think I'm worried. Now get dressed and let's go to the OR. I had to put in a neat little stitch. It's no big deal. It's uncomfortable, but it's not fatal. Don't worry. You'll have to wear a Band-Aid. Come back in 2 days. I'll take a look. You can get up now. You write the bill, I'll pay everything." He nodded and went into the office. When she came in after him, he turned sharply to her and said, "I've missed you, Kelly, and I've wanted to see you all the time. I missed the look of your voice, the smell of you." He continued to say something, making her lose herself in reality. "I can't do it without you. I've tried, but it doesn't work. I missed our conversations too." He wrapped his arms around her, and she didn't want to push him away. Ethan. It felt like if he broke the embrace now, he'd miss her forever. "I've tried to stay away from you, but it's not working. I love you, Kelly," he whispered, looking into her beautiful eyes. "I probably love you too." Even more quietly, the woman said, and he put all the tenderness and love he had for her into his kiss, and she responded with just as much desire. Now they were doing what they had forbidden themselves to do for a year and a half. Perhaps their time had come. It was a derangement of reason. Obsession, mad infatuation, obsession, passion. You could call it all sorts of things. But they didn't linger now. Nothing needed to be said. They felt everything. After a year and a half apart, Ethan and Kelly became lovers. "Ethan, hi. I finally got you on the phone. How are you? Better now. Do you want me to fly up to you? I'd love to. I need someone to share it with, someone to talk to. I'm wandering around the house like a ghost. Aren't you working? No, I'm working now. Otherwise, I'd probably go crazy. Okay, I'll call you as soon as I get the tickets. I'll be really looking forward to seeing you. Thomas was a childhood friend, the one and only for life. At first, they had lived near each other, gone to the same kindergarten, then sat at the same desk at school and fought off the local bullies together. They went to college together. Although Thomas didn't really want to go to medical school, he decided to go with his friend. 6 years at the institute brought the boys even closer together. His friend did not work as a doctor, but organized his own clinic, where excellent specialists worked. He turned out to be a great organizer and administrator. And the inheritance left by his parents helped in opening the clinic. He had to weigh a lot of things, think, plan, calculate what it will cost him this or that project, and whether the game is worth the candle. And so far, he hasn't been wrong. He had a gut feeling, which did not deceive him. True, the friends were now far apart. Ethan in New York, David in Toronto, but the distance did not prevent the friends from socializing and meeting more often at the earliest opportunity. Thomas was in New York on business. Ethan, having extensive acquaintances and connections, helped his friend to solve unsolvable problems. Thomas had a family, 2 beautiful daughters and a son. His wife worked at his clinic. There were no outbursts of jealousy because, unlike Ethan, Thomas dealt with paperwork and his wife didn't see it as a threat to her marriage. And Ethan was alone again. And at the thought of her, the man's heart clenched. Many women wanted to be near this successful man, but the place really belonged to Kelly alone. Of course, so did Thomas, but in another sense, he had no operations today. But Ethan got up at 700 am anyway, washed and cleaned up, and called the clinic. Everything's in place, he asked. Are you ready for surgery? Yeah, we're good. Ethan is ready and everything is in place. Call me if anything goes wrong. Okay, cell phone rings, it's a house. He bought it for her to live here, to breathe the forest air, to swim in the small, clean river in the summer. And now this house he hated. It was empty and cold without Oli in it. Ethan hadn't felt so happy in years. And never in his life had there been a woman like Kelly, beautiful, exciting. Simmons fell in love with her as soon as he saw her. And they didn't even know each other. She's a patient, a married woman with 2 grown children. He's a doctor, but once they talked, they both realized they were attracted to each other. Ethan admired her ability to look both sexy and elegant at the same time. He was pleased to realize that such an interesting woman was in love with him. Kelly, on the other hand, thought that everything that happened between them was a special atmosphere. The doctor saves the patient and gives her back her beautiful face. Kelly wanted to believe in what was happening between them. She wanted to believe that everything that was happening, that what was going on between them was sincere. She had never had another man in her life other than her husband, and he was the only one she felt the most important relationship with. Competing with William was difficult. Even a very handsome, reliable, intelligent, and charming man. He loved his Kalinka as he had the first day they met. But Ethan had turned everything in her mind upside down. They had always been good together. This woman was to him the embodiment of everything a man could dream of in his life. Kelly was his fairy tale princess, not only beautiful, but also smart seductive. All in all, the best. They were crazy about each other. She gave Ethan that special state of mind that made him want to move mountains. They enjoyed each other's company. He had never imagined he would be so happy with just her presence. Ethan would never forget the time spent with her. In the evening, Thomas called again. I leave tomorrow at 8 p.m. I've got the number. Tell me I'll meet you, but it'll be at night. Yeah, I don't care, I don't sleep. I'd rather meet you. Okay, well, whatever you need me to do to get there myself. Now Ethan slept only before the operation, taking sleeping pills to make him sleepy in the evening. Today, he was on his way to meet a friend. He was glad to see him. It was quite dark outside when he drove out of the house. It was still about 40 minutes until Thomas arrived, and he was excited to walk around the lounge. Looking at his watch, he heard the airplane. When he looked at his watch, he heard that the Toronto-New York plane had landed at the airport. Ethan hadn't seen Thomas yet, but he was already smiling. But it's taking a long time. Our friend didn't come out for a long time. Both Ethan and Ethan craned their necks, looking for him. You'll be looking for me for a long time. There was a familiar voice behind me. Ethan turned around, looking at you with all his eyes. Well, hello, friend. It's good to see you, and they hugged. I hope you didn't come for 2 days. Ethan asked hopefully, looking at Thomas. 2 weeks. Great. It was said sincerely because Ethan understood how hard it was for his friend to get away, to leave his family and job, and devote 2 weeks to a friend. You don't look good, Thomas concluded. Be thankful I'm still alive. And to be honest, I still don't believe that what happened to me was real. Talking, they quickly reached the house. This is quite a palace, Thomas said when he saw the mansion. It's not too big for you. It is bigger even for my family. I want to sell it and buy an apartment near the office so I can walk to work. That's a great idea. Mr. Plastic Surgeon. While Thomas showered, Ethan prepared a simple breakfast. Ethan made a simple breakfast, and they sat across from each other, drinking coffee and wrinkling their faces at the pleasant smell of the beverage. You go get some rest. I'll go to the clinic. Rest up, Thomas. It's a deal. His friend fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Ethan stopped by the clinic, where he hadn't been for 2 days. But things were going on as usual. Everyone was in place, and everyone was busy doing their own thing. It was literally half an hour. He drove back. On the way, he bought good cognac, meat, cheese, caviar. And when he entered the house, there was silence. Thomas was still asleep. He took care of the meat. He battered it well, roasted it a little on both sides, and put it in the oven. He made sandwiches, sliced sausage and cheese, turned on the TV quietly, and waited for him to come down. About an hour later, Thomas came down a little backed up with bangs of black hair. It brought back memories of sleeping over at each other's houses as kids and getting up in the morning. Exactly the same way. Your place is so quiet, so peaceful. It's quiet in my house. Only at night, when everyone's quiet. That's beautiful, Thomas. Family's important. How long have you known that? I've always known it. The thing is, not all the women could compete with my work. They always thought I loved them less. What do you think? They were right. I guess I've got the meat ready. I'm not much of a cook, so I didn't try anything fancy. I just did the basics. But you're good. I can't even do that, grinned my friend. That's how we live. But you like it, don't you? Yes, but when I get tired, I have a place to run away for 2 weeks. It's harder for my wife. She doesn't have a friend like that. Ethan was smiling. It was like he was alive, and the house didn't seem blind to him anymore. They went into the dining room, and he put his arm around his friend's shoulders. It was a rather spacious room furnished with furniture in soft stock colors. On the walls hung paintings with appropriately themed reproductions. Looking at the paintings, Thomas asked. Ethan nodded. There was a large Kiev palm tree in the corner, and the dining room window overlooked the garden. But there were tempting aromas coming from the table, and the men felt hungry. And you have a very cozy and clean place with someone helping you. The man nodded and pointed Thomas to the table. Ethan couldn't start a conversation about himself, and Thomas didn't rush him. They had been sitting for over an hour, sipping cognac. They took their time, reminiscing a lot. Ethan even laughed, something he hadn't done in 4 months. There was a deep crease between his eyebrows, and his hair was graying. He spoke suddenly, and Thomas prepared himself to listen. It was an important quality in a man. He never interrupted, but was patient and tried to see the situation from the outside. He avoided hasty, judgmental assessments. This created a favorable atmosphere for conversation. Now I know for sure that fate does not like those who have everything. Ethan glanced over at Thomas. I realized this to the fullest extent when yesterday I was a successful businessman and the best surgeon. A full house and, most importantly, a loving, beloved woman. Turns out, what I used to think was love was a big mistake. Can you believe it? I only knew true love with her. With this incredible woman. Why didn't you marry her? Taking advantage of the pause, Thomas asked, 365 times a year I asked her to be my wife, and 365 times she gave me reasons to postpone it. The children are still in school. If I left, they might drop out. Then the kids had to get jobs. Then my daughter had her first love. Then my husband had a promotion. I had to support him. And so on for almost all 6 years. We dreamed with her about how we would live together, where we would spend our vacations. She tossed herself between her husband and me. It was easier for me. I'm a man, I'm free. She was married. A loving mother. I understood all that and was content to see her. Did your husband guess about your relationship? Ethan answered this question not immediately. There was such silence in the house that one could hear the huge floor clock ticking in Ethan's study. But a hurricane was raging in the man's soul. He was reliving the tragedy all over again. I think he guessed. He even came to my clinic. We had a very long talk. Quietly, calmly, and let Kelly decide for herself. But she didn't come to me right after our first explanation and our one kiss. She disappeared for 2 months. She didn't even come back for the shock. Then I found out that William had done it himself. I had no right to rush her, realizing how hard it was for her to decide. On one side of the scales of 20 years of married life, 2 children, and a loving husband, and on the other a love affair that flared up. Perhaps she was expecting that this love that flared up so quickly would extinguish even more quickly. But it didn't, and one day she came to me on her own. Can you imagine that day and hour I remembered for the rest of my life? To give his friend a break from the heavy memories, Thomas raised a shot glass. Ethan, let's drink to your happy future. It's impossible without her, he said, in a shaky voice. Anything is possible in life, and they drank. The bottle of cognac was long since empty, and both men were completely sober. The first time she called me If was when she burst into my apartment after 2 months away. If, I can't be without you. She said it then. I've tried, but I can't do it. And she hugged me. At that moment, I was the happiest person in the world. She stayed with me until late afternoon and went home. I didn't want to let her go. You can't imagine. I loved everything about her. I adored her. I didn't even realize you could love each other so passionately. I could hardly concentrate on my work. I enjoyed giving her gifts. To fulfill her every whim, and she didn't want much. You know the song. There's a sweetheart around. That's the one. A year went by like that, but nothing changed. We used every minute to be together. We didn't know how to handle it. Kelly thought it would all work out in time, but time passed. The knot was getting tighter and tighter, and she couldn't find a solution. I loved her so much that I was ready to let her go when I saw her suffering. But she wouldn't even hear of it. I can't be without you, Ethan. I need you. So move in with me, and it'll be easier for everyone to put an end to this. That's when she started crying. I know, she'd interrupt me, but you know, I can't do this right away. I have a life. Kelly, I mean right away, it's been almost 2 years. She'd start crying again, and I couldn't stand her tears, and I'd immediately apologize for pushing her. As he was saying this, he didn't notice the mountain of torn paper napkins that lay beside him. He was tearing them with fury. Thomas didn't touch him, realizing the man needed to vent his negativity, and all your dreams of living together remained a dream. He asked. Yes, they were. It didn't work out. We kept seeing each other every spare minute. I bought this house for her to be more outdoors, to relax, but she always thought about her children, who also arranged her scandals and expressed their discontent. And after another domestic scandal, she disappeared again for 2 months. I called her to see if everything was all right. Yes, she replied in her iron voice, I was fine. I remember that night I got drunker than ever. On principle, alcohol is the anesthesia that allows you to undergo the operation called life. I didn't want to live, but I didn't make any claims against her, realizing she was having a harder time than I was. After a couple weeks, I started to let go, and I was working like crazy. It saved me a lot. I took on the most complicated surgeries at the time when I was so stressed, and I had a great result. I was surprised myself, but the patients were very satisfied. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Ethan, you can come to the clinic right away. Something's happened. Yes, there's something wrong with a patient here. Okay, I'll be right there. He washed and cleaned up. Called a cab. Thomas, watch TV. Give me a break. I'll be right back. But Thomas decided to look around the house. It took him an hour. He went into Ethan's study. It was in perfect order. Only a few white sheets and a pen were out of order. They were poems. Even Thomas didn't know that Ethan's writing on poems was them again. As he read through the outline, he realized that he had truly loved this woman and had suffered a tragedy. Ethan came back a couple hours later. Did you get everything sorted out? Yeah, thank God they managed without me. Ethan, I'm sorry, but I've been reading your poems, and I love them. They convey your pain, the depth of the tragedy you've suffered. I didn't know you had a talent for it. It's true what they say. A talented man is talented at everything. But Ethan waved his hand and let's go and buy you some real Indian tea, given by a grateful husband, and they both laughed. For some time they were silently enjoying the aroma of the drink. Ethan suddenly asked his friend, "Tell me, how can I go on living? Nothing pleases me. Not even my once favorite job. Ethan, everything passes. It will pass, and this time heals. Your soul hurts. All you have to do is wait. So what happened next?" Thomas asked. 2 months later, she came again. She looked awful. "You don't feel well." I asked her. "Yes," she replied. "I don't feel well without you." "Then stay." She nodded and stayed. In the morning, we had breakfast and felt almost like a family. All the 5+ years we've been seeing each other whenever we had the chance. I think back now and wonder how we managed it. But I guess these things happen. I lived from her leaving to her returning to me, and marveled that a year had passed, then 2, 3, 4. We were good together. But even then, she found reasons to wait a little longer. I didn't consider those reasons to be reasons. It was more like an excuse not to change anything. I had given up all hope of seeing her around as a wife, but 5 years passed, and one day she came to me with a suitcase. When I opened the door to her, I stood like a stumbling block, and she threw the suitcase, hugged me, pressing her nose against my neck. And she was crying quietly. "Why are you crying?" "For joy. Because I decided to take this step, and you're there for me." We talked all night. She told me that William quietly let her go, saying that the sacrifices she was trying to make to save her family were of no use to anyone. Everyone had figured it out a long time ago. But you know this, he told her. "If you need my help, call me right away." So the point was finally made. And we started living together. She never filed for divorce. I was never meant to be her husband. I made her quit her job. She looked terrible. She couldn't sleep at night. Walked around the house like a ghost. But after 2 or 3 months, she calmed down. She slept again, had an appetite. I hired a cook so she wouldn't cook, but rest. He cooked delicacies for her 6 months later. My beloved came to life, ran up to me. And that's when I decided it was happiness. She was a beacon for me, a guiding star, a light in the window. And I knew it would always be that way, no matter what happened. 8 months of happiness, taking a 2-week vacation. She and I flew to Paris, spent unforgettable days in the city of love. She chose where to go, what to see. But I would have been happy even if we were in a hotel room. We went to the movies, walked around Paris, talked about everything that came to mind. And sometimes we would just sit next to each other and be silent. Feeling perfectly happy, we could talk about literature, painting, fashion, theater. She was a versatile person, and I was surprised to find that she knew as much about painting as she did about fashion. We could talk about our parents, about childhood dreams and youthful desires, and the beginning of adulthood and careers. We were never bored. Women I knew, looking at us, would often say to me later, "What do you see in her? She pales next to you." And I wondered how they couldn't see the beauty of this goddess. She was beautiful. She was absolutely made for me. And then I realized that any even divine perfection causes envy and irritation in mere mortals. So I smiled condescendingly and in a minute forgot what they were talking about. Why has fate treated me so unfairly? Ethan asked Thomas, "Why isn't she here? And I'm sitting here drinking cognac with you. It wasn't supposed to be like this." His friend sat looking at him and thinking how much was still a very deep wound, too fresh for him to think about anything but his loss. The thought of living and enjoying life, Ethan found sacrilegious. Life is such a thing, you never know what's around the corner. Thomas said, knowing full well that it was a poor consolation. As for Ethan himself, he was not relieved by this conversation. On the contrary, he felt infinitely lonely, neglected, unwanted. And Thomas seriously doubted whether Ethan would ever be able to forget his beloved woman. Not even to forget, and at least to stop feeding you for her departure and live with hindsight. He won't be able to let another one into his heart for a long time. After 8 months, I began to notice that something was happening to her. To all my questions, she said she had a slight headache. I looked at the pills she was taking. They were painkillers. Sometimes at night, she'd sit in the living room and watch TV, even though it hadn't been on for a long time. "Kelly, are you feeling sick?" "No, just insomnia." "How's your headache?" Then she started to look better and even had some fun. But after 2 months, her condition worsened dramatically. She held her head and said the pills didn't help. "Should we go to the clinic?" "No, I'm not going. It'll pass now." But I saw that her condition was terrible, and this time I didn't give in. I took her by the hand, and no matter how much she resisted, put her in the car and drove her to the paid clinic. Her complexion, as we drove, had turned a sort of gray, and she looked as if she had aged. I realized, something terrible is happening. "Yeah, I don't need help. I don't need the clinic," she assured me. "Kelly, do this for me so I can rest assured that nothing terrible is happening to you." "Okay, but this is the last time I'm not going to any more clinics. I've had enough of those hospitals." "God," I asked then. Only if she was all right, although deep down I was prepared to hear the worst. Even mentally, I was already thinking about what lies I would tell Ola if she was found to have a terrible disease. But God did not hear me because the tests were disappointing. The brain tumor was not opera. "You came too late," the doctor told me, "at least a couple months earlier, and now it's too late. You're a doctor, you can see for yourself. I'm taking her to Germany, to Israel, where they can help. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it's useless. Before you torture your wife, send those test results and you'll get an answer. I'm 200% sure it will be the same. Again, I'm sorry. Okay, not the surgery. But it's possible to prolong her life. If not stop, at least slow down the progression of the disease. Let's start the treatment, the medicine, the money, it's all there. Of course, we are not refusing treatment, but you must be ready at any moment. The tumor's too deep, there's a lot of blood vessels. We're not gods either, and we can't do everything yet," the doctor said regretfully. Kelly was admitted to the clinic. I sent her tests to every clinic in the world. In Germany, they refused immediately. In Israel, they gave me hope at first, but then they refused. So I called my friend in the States, asked him to find out everything, sent the tests. They told him to let him come, but we can't give any guarantees. The disease is neglected. Then I called Vitaly and asked to meet him. He only specified where and when. We met in the park, we looked at each other without anger, but we didn't give each other a hand. "Kelly is dying," I said, and he immediately turned pale. "What's wrong?" "Brain tumor." Glebplastum immediately asked him. "Yes, all the clinics refused to take her. The tumor's not for. You can see the MRI results. I brought them with me at the time, and when he saw them, he cried. We both lost her. The treatment did nothing. And 2 months later, my snail was gone. I still can't believe it. That it's gone. It may sound cliché, but death is hard to get used to, especially since she suffered so much. A terrible death," Thomas said quietly. "For the first month, I didn't know what to do. I felt like a ship without a helmsman, doomed to sail the seas forever and not docked on any shore. I told you fate doesn't like those who have everything. That's why it was taken from me," and covering his face with his hands, Ethan sobbed like a child. Thomas sat there unable to utter a word. He was crushed by the story and didn't know how to help his friend. It was as if Ethan had read his mind. "Don't worry, Thomas. I could have told you all that. So back to life. She's not alive, but I am alive. though I think it's unfair. If, in the opinion of those who knew our history, she did not deserve heaven, at least let her find peace, Ithan said. Will you be happy? Thomas took his hand. Probably, but not for a while.
Subscribe and click the bell.
She held on through the thick shrubbery, writhing in blood, arms, and legs. But the pain was nothing compared to the fear that filled her entire being. At some point, Jenna turned back and saw the burning lights of hungry eyes. She lunged forward with all her might, but someone invisible threw her body back to where those hungry eyes were burning. Jenna could smell the scent of predators. It was getting closer by the second, the terror paralyzing her. She wanted to scream, but only a wheeze escaped from her chest. Immediately, several wolves pounced on her, but they did not tear her helpless body. If anything, they begged loudly, "Jenna, wake up. Open your eyes, Jenna." She struggled to pull herself out of the house of eerie dreams and saw her roommate's face above her. Maria smiled kindly at her. "Have you come to your senses? It was a nightmare and a dream. It happens a lot after chemotherapy. I had the same horror dreams. When I was in my first year of treatment, I'm a little more adjusted now." Jenna struggled to sit up in bed. She felt very dizzy and nauseous, and every cell of her body was soapy with extreme pain. "I probably won't make it. It's only my second year, but the first time was much easier." Maria's making a fuss. "Now I'll give you some water. You should drink more." The woman filled a glass and handed it to Jenna. "Of course, it's better to drink natural juices. They are much healthier in this situation." Jenna drank a little from the glass and put it on the nightstand. "My husband should be here today. I'll ask him to buy me some juices. You know, Maria, it all worked out spontaneously. I didn't expect to be diagnosed with such a serious illness. I thought my hemoglobin was dropping again. I was often anemic as a child. Doctors used to wonder where it came from. My parents literally fed me fruit and all sorts of calorie-dense goodies, and I was still like a ghost." Maria's got the look of a connoisseur. Such cases are not rare. And everything is to blame genetics, that in our family everyone was centuries. None of my ancestors had hypertension or cancer, and all the grandparents lived over 90 years. It's just Jenna. Your relatives didn't have the opportunity for a thorough examination. If I'm not mistaken, you're from the country. Close enough. My native village is considered a district center, but in fact, it is a large village. Most of the population works at the communal combine. By the way, it is one of the oldest enterprises in the region. My grandparents worked there, and my parents are still carrying on the family baton." A rather long monologue deprived the young woman of her last strength, and she sank down on the cushion. Maria sat down next to her and with motherly care adjusted the blanket. "Jenna, save your strength. We have many days ahead of us, so we'll make a deal and even get tired of each other. Breakfast should be brought to us now, and after we eat and drink a little more." The mention of food caused Jenna's stomach to reflexively contract to suppress an attack of nausea. She had to sit up and take a few deep breaths. Her roommate sympathetically patted Jenna on the shoulder. "I couldn't get used to it at first either, but I adjusted quickly. Sour makes the nausea go away. Have some orange juice." Jenna tried to object. "Don't. Maria, are you embarrassing me? My husband will come soon and bring me juice and fruit." The neighbor looked carefully at the companion coup. "Jenna, you must have read books about the war and seen movies." "Of course I have, but I don't see the connection between the last war and my illness." "There is a connection, and it's very direct. Soldiers shared the last of their food with each other. You and I also happen to be in the same foxhole. That is, in this ward. That's why we are ordered from above to help each other. And then it's a common practice. Today I have something, tomorrow you'll have it. We're human beings, not wild wolves." The mention of a forest predator made Jenna flinch again. "Oh, Maria, I've been dreaming about those evil things. You wouldn't believe it. I saw them as if they were real. Even their breath felt so unimaginable sense of reality." Such dreams are what we call faithful dreams. But night dreams are filled with symbols, and wolves can act as an enemy or the same disease. What is explainable in your case? You should not be frightened by such a vision. My grandmother often told me about the meaning of dreams too. Jenna is silent for a few seconds and then continued to share her conclusions with her neighbor. Maria, I just realized that this creepy dream is a warning from above. Maybe my grandmother is sending me a signal from that Jenna. Although I'm not a mystic, I can't rule it out. You know, Jenna, before my illness, I always thought predictions and omens were nonsense. But now my opinion has changed a lot. The door of the ward opened, and the employee of the food block in a snow-white uniform easily rolled a cart, set plates with the movement of a magician. She grabbed 2 dishes at once with one hand and placed them on the table. Today we have a special recipe for flying girls and cups set up. I'll pour you some hot tea. It took the kitchen worker no more than a minute to serve their room, and she rolled the cart farther down the hall. Jenna critically assessed the appearance of the ethical dish. Cat, baby, how do I eat you? Maria was already actively wielding a spoon. And you, Jenna? Through not wanting to. Imagine you've been given a medicine on which your life depends. The young woman swallowed 5 spoons with difficulty and quickly stuffed the unpalatable breakfast with juice that her neighbor offered her. The latter had already managed to straighten up her porridge and was enjoying her tea. Not enough at all. You've eaten. It won't work that way. It's not working. I get sick to my stomach when I force myself. I'd rather eat a little, but more often. Maybe. Jenna, you are right. Your body will tell you how it is more comfortable, and try to get more rest. Jenna didn't answer the kind woman because she was already dozing off. She could still hear the sounds around her, but her consciousness slowly drifted away to where peace and tranquility waited. She already felt the touch of her grandmother's warm hand and heard an old-fashioned lullaby. In the life of little Jenna, Wendy played not the most important role. The girl's parents were absent 24 hours a day at their mill. It came to the point that the mother and father did not see each other for months because they did not coincide shifts. Therefore, the day came when they had to call on the help of her grandmother. Although Varvara Tikhanov was not flattered that the son and daughter-in-law cannot do without her help, she was helping out. What kind of parents are you if you can't manage with one child? And how in the old days people had time to bend their backs for half a day, and then still at home with all the things to manage. My mom had 6, and she managed. Mike listened to his mother, and then not without irony asked, I agree. My grandmother was good, a real heroine mother. But what did you, Mom, fall behind your ancestors? She only gave birth to me and Stephen. And of the 2 of us, one of us was a foolish mind. Little Jenna wasn't privy to the family history. Only later did she learn that Uncle Stephen had once stepped on a slippery slope. Their family didn't like to talk about the murky business that had gotten a relative exiled to Kolyma. Jenna several times tried to elicit from her grandmother this secret, but Wendy was waved away. It's better for you, granddaughter, not to know. You don't have an uncle, that's all. Otherwise, you could ruin your whole life with that kind of kinship. Mike, your daddy, had to take his wife's name so no one would find out. But that answer didn't sit well with Jenna. Grandma, what did Uncle Stephen do that was so bad? If you knew him as a student, they'd say he was a traitor. I don't believe it. Stephen was framed. He couldn't have done what they say he did. Your grandfather, Ethan, didn't believe it either. He tried to defend his honor. How could you break a system that was grinding up so many innocent people? Where's Grandpa Ethan? Did they put him in jail too? No, Jenna, your grandfather died. When did Stephen's story happen? His heart gave out. He was the secretary of the party organization at the plant. So he had to lose not only his party membership card, but his life as well. Oh, it's better not to remember that time. I still don't know how Mike and I managed to survive. We had to move in with my aunt for a while. When the Stephen story was forgotten, Mike came back to the settlement and married your mom's Kelly. Wendy told this story many times in different variations, but Jenna always found an excuse to ask the elderly relative a couple of additional questions on the subject. Most of all, the girl was concerned about unfamiliar places. While her granddaughter was small, Wendy, as she could, described to her this amazing place. And when Jenna was 10 years old, the grandmother resolutely told her parents all the signs. Jenna is already big. Tie her to her aunt. Let the girl with her own eyes will see the splendor of the Karelian forests. Son and daughter-in-law were surprised by such poetry of speech. A simple woman. But Wendy decided to completely dazzle them and sang. Her naive singing was akin to a toothache, but the couple listened patiently through the popular songs of the Khrushchev thaw. And Mike even got so emotional that a tear came to his eye. "Okay, Mom, let Jenna come with you this summer." "Really, we were thinking of sending her to camp." The girl overheard outside the door. She'd forgotten all about vigilance. All she had to do was tell her father about camp. "Daddy, I'm not going. I'm going to your camp. I've had enough of last summer. It sucked. And the soup they gave us was terrible." The parents screamed at Jenna. Most of all, the 10-year-old girl was struck by the Karelian forests, although their village was also among the pine forests. The forests of the former parts of the Suomi Republic stretched for hundreds of kilometers, and anyone unfamiliar with the area could easily get lost. Anna, Wendy's aunt, had therefore warned her at once. "You girl, don't go beyond the village. It's easy to get confused even 5 steps away from home." Anna was also struck by Jenna. The girl thought that there was no one in the world older than her grandmother, but it turned out that Anna is older than her niece by as much as 25 years. When Jenna added the two values in her mind and got 93 as a result, she could not cope with excitement for a long time. But Anna smiled affectionately that she couldn't believe that I had already turned 10 and 10. There are a lot of long livers here. There are even some who are already over 100 years old. Do you know why we are so tenacious? The girl shook her head. "No, I don't know." Anna was satisfied with the effect. "The air here is special, clean. And there are mushrooms and berries. They also have incredible power. For example, I go to the forest myself. I can walk all day long. And I don't feel tired." Jenna was curious about the unusual life of the Karelian villagers, who ate little meat, but always had fish and tea on the table. Anna cooked according to her secret recipe. She brewed herbs and added pine needles to them. Such a drink would protect her granddaughter from any illness, although her grandmother's tea was bitter. Jenna drank it by force. She really wanted to live to the same age as Aunt Wendy. One day, Jenna obeyed her grandmother's and decided to walk along the edge of the forest. The girl was followed by a dog named Rex, to whom the grandmother did not forgive any pranks. As soon as the girl got into the forest, in front of her ran a trampled path. Jenna cheerfully thought in vain. "My grandmother's used to scare me. I'll walk a little bit along the path, and then I'll go back along it." Jenna walked no more than 100 meters, as suddenly to the left of the path, she saw a huge glade of flowers. Forgetting about everything in the world, the girl began to collect a bouquet for grandmothers. Then she came across a glade of blueberries and ate enough berries. Jenna forgot about time and went far away from the path. Dusk began to descend slowly on the forest, and the girl said chillingly, "The horror." She darted between the tall trees, trying to find that life-saving path that would bring her back to the village. But she never found it. The sun was already below the horizon, and Jenna began to hear terrible sounds. She crouched down on the hill and cried in despair. "How stupid of me. I didn't listen to Grandma Anya. Now the wolves will soon come here and eat me out of fear." I said this version out loud, and immediately a suspicious noise was heard in the bushes. Jenna ran away, but into the clearing ran out. Satisfied, Rex looked at the girl with his intelligent eyes, and in them she read reproaches of judgment. Then Rex barked and ran forward. Jenna hurried after the dog. If the girl lagged behind, Rex stopped and waited patiently for her. So, with the help of the counselor and the girl returned to the village. It was already quite dark, and near the courtyard of Anna crowded people. Uncle Peter, who came in the morning, handed out orders to divide into 4 groups to speed up the search. We walk in a solid line of streetlights, keep them on. The man did not have time to give the order before the end, when a woman's scream was heard. "Stand down. We got our girl Rex. She's being led." Both grandmothers ran out of the crowd at the same time. "Jenna, what are you doing to us? You almost drove your grandmothers to their graves." The women scolded the girl, not forgetting to kiss her. When the moment was right, Jenna handed them the bouquet of flowers she had picked so diligently in the woods. This gesture finally melted the hearts of the elderly ladies, and they wept. "What a good granddaughter we have growing up," thought of the grandmothers. From both sides again sprinkled kisses. Apparently, it's a touching ceremony. Rex didn't like the reunion, and he raised his voice. "They're freaking out. Don't worry, Rex. No one's forgotten about you. You're our hero." The loyal dog was rewarded for his selfless act with a sugar bone. Then all evening, Anna told Jenna local legends about giants turned to stone and the masters of the forest. The main thing in our forests is the wolf and the bear, but these animals are not supposed to be called by their proper names. Especially in the summer, they can get angry for such an attitude. The girl listened to the ancient tales with her mouth wide open. And how should they be called? What if I go to the forest again and meet a wolf? Anna shook her head. "It is better for you not to meet one-on-one with this beast, but if you do, call its tail a stick." Jenna laughed at Anna. "But there are no such names. It's you there in the middle zone does not happen. But we call wolves that." Anna. Then every night before going to bed, she told the girl scary tales that made her veins bleed from the rear. In the child's memory, these stories crashed for a long time, but over the years they were almost forgotten. And only now, when Jenna's body began, and from the inside sharpened terrible disease, she again remembered the wicked witch. All this and the moose that turns into a human during the day. Andrew didn't show up until the end of the week. Although Jenna was offended by his long absence, she didn't make a scene in front of her neighbor. But when Maria tactfully came out, the young woman could not help her reproach. "Andrew, couldn't you have come sooner? I've been here all week on my own. I don't even have a penny for necessary expenses." The man snapped at her. "If you didn't come, then you couldn't. There's nothing wrong with you. You even started up. The treatment must be good for you." Jenna wouldn't tell her husband how hard she'd been through her second round of chemo. "That's fine. But the doctor said you need to eat more nutrition now. You should eat more fruit and drink juices. Maybe I should get you a cross-litter one too." Andrew said those words with a sneer, and Jenna was silent. For about half an hour, her husband told about his successes at work and about a new profitable partnership. The woman silently listened and accordingly nodded her head, telling all the news about herself. The man thought that it was enough for one visit. He could have, but he hit me in the forehead. "I'm out of here. I'm off. I can't promise to be back tomorrow. But as soon as I get a free moment, I'll be sure to visit you. Andrew, leave me some money. There's a store here. I'll buy what I need." There was a series of grumbles and sighs, but the man took out his purse and counted out a few bills. "I think you'll have enough for the first time." The phrase was said in an affirmative tone, and the woman nodded her head again. Barely had the door closed behind Andrew, tears spontaneously sprang from his eyes. Back in the room, Maria got worried. "Jenna, are you sick? Should I call a nurse?" Did the woman wave her arms? No, I'm fine. I guess the treatment must have heightened my sense of self-pity. I don't think that's the reason. I'm not in the habit of intruding on other people's lives. But your husband hasn't been very nice to you." Jenna took a sip. "He's like that now. He used to be kind and helpful. And what kept him from being that way? My illness." Maria was shocked by this confession. "Jenna, wait, but it shouldn't be like this. Any normal person, especially a husband, should show mercy. The support of loved ones can work wonders. I know this from my own experience. My son and daughter-in-law did not leave me at first, even spent the night in the ward. Only thanks to them I got out of that, Jenna. And now my desire to live has doubled. After all, I will soon have a granddaughter or granddaughter. It's such a powerful incentive. Jenna looked with envy at the spiritualized face of this already not young woman. She thought bitterly and painfully about the fact that she had no one left to care for her. Wendy's grandmother had passed away 15 years ago. Her parents died in a plane crash. They had been saving up money for a vacation for several years and died. They were gone in March, and in January, Jenna and Andrew had a big wedding. The parents of the newlyweds wanted to surprise the whole village and organized a grand celebration. At their insistence, after the couple was married in the registry office, they went to the temple, where they were married by a priest according to all church canons. The bride was then overwhelmed with the brightest feelings, and she sincerely believed that now their hearts are united for eternity. After the sacrament of marriage, Andrew asked Jenna with a chuckle, "It is really ready to be with me both in sorrow and in joy?" The girl answered without hesitation, "Of course. And aren't you ready?" The groom turned everything into a joke. "Let's say I am ready to rejoice with you, but I'm not so sure about the sorrow." Jenna was unpleasant to hear such statements only a few minutes after the ceremony. She wanted to say something harsh to Andrew, but he beat her to it, and I can already see that you are offended. Jenna, you are so touching. You're incredibly beautiful in the moment. Jenna was even more offended. There was a moment when she was ready to turn around and leave, but her newly married husband grabbed her arm. "No puffing and puffing like a steam engine. People look at us, they will say that we did not have time to sign and already quarreled, so it doesn't happen. Andrew, you have to think before you speak. You're the one who's so upset about the grief. Well, just think about it, because there are different cases in life, and not everyone is ready to accept the problems of another person, even if it's a wife or parents." Andrew avoided a direct answer. "Jenna, please don't escalate the situation now. The guests are waiting for the holiday, and let's not deprive them of joy. You and I have hundreds of days and nights ahead of us to talk things over." The happy man then picked Jenna up in his arms and carried her to the restaurant where the event was to take place. For 3 days, the guests partied at the wedding, and that unpleasant conversation lost its former poignancy. Then the first family problems appeared, and they had to be urgently solved. It was the bride's parents who provided substantial help to the newlyweds. When Mike found out that his daughter and son-in-law were going to rent a place, he even took offense. "It's like you're not family. Why wander around in other people's corners? And pay for it. Live. Our apartment is big enough for everyone. And when the grandchildren come, my mother and I will take care of them." But these optimistic plans were not destined to come true. A little more than a month passed, and there was a catastrophe, which took the lives of 2 people closest to Jenna. In those difficult days for the young woman, Andrew did not allow his wife to dissolve in grief. The man even took another vacation from her to be by her side. "Jenna, you have to get over it. Life goes on, and you have to live at least for the sake of your parents to be calm there, in heaven." Her husband's persuasions worked, and the young woman began to revive little by little. She was grateful to her husband for not abandoning her and supporting her in her time of need. Days passed, and this gratitude gradually transformed into submission. First, Andrew told his wife to change her place of work. "Jenna, I have the latest information at the mill. Very soon there will be a new shop, and they promise a very high salary. Since I am not the last person at the plant, I have the opportunity to arrange a money place for my own wife." This news did not please Jenna. "Andrew, aren't you excited? I've heard about this shop. It's not going to be good. You know you don't get high wages for nothing. They pay big bonuses for hazardous working conditions. That's exactly the kind of risky place the new shop will be. If you follow the safety rules, you won't be in any danger." The young woman didn't like her husband's insistence on putting her in a hazardous workplace. "Andrew, Why didn't you take the initiative yourself? Don't you get it? My higher education does not allow me to become a simple handyman, and I only graduated from high school. That's why I'm destined to take a place in the ranks of laborers." The man didn't feel his wife's question was a trick. Sort of. "Jenna, you and me, we've been dreaming of a big apartment. We need money for that. That's the first time I've ever heard you say that. I mean, I'm doing pretty good in this apartment. Besides, I think we should start thinking about having a baby. After all, we've been married almost 3 years." Andrew knew well that his wife could not resist tenderness. He paddled over to her and began to whisper, "If you don't want to, don't go to the new shop. It's not like I'm forcing you. And in the old apartment, we can still live quite well. But think how uncomfortable it will be for our children. After all, you and I will have at least 3. Ivansov." Jenna took the bait immediately. "Dear husband, are you sure we'll have boys? Maybe I'm going to give you 3 princesses." Soon Jenna moved to work in the new shop, and her Andrew took the chair of the first deputy director of the company. A little more time passed, and the couple sold the old apartment. Jenna did not know that her husband did not intend to live in Jubilee in the future. Andrew informed his wife about his intention to buy housing in the city immediately after the sale of the parental living space. The woman was shocked. "Why didn't you warn me? What am I supposed to do now? How am I going to get to work?" The man listened to his wife and smiled. "Jenna, why are you making an elephant out of a fly? From the city to the village is only 20 kilometers, and the bus runs regularly. That's one. And what's your surprise number 2? Andrew deliberately paused to make the effect more vivid. "Number 2. I think you'll be able to settle down in the city after the housewarming party. Indeed, why jeopardize your health if you can find a quiet job? And you'll help. You got me on that one too. Jenna, come sit next to me. I'll tell you all the trade secrets." The young woman complied with her husband's request. "I'm listening to you very carefully. We have significant events ahead of us. Our factory and several other enterprises will soon be united into a single network. It's a kind of concern in our country. It's one of the first experiments." Jenna begged Andrew, "Can we skip these details? Tell me, what fate have you prepared for your wife?" "All right. Then it's easier now. In short, we plan to open a store in the near future, and I'll get you a job in this outlet. True, the salary will be half as much, but at least the work is harmless close to home. What do you think of my decision?" Jenna was touched by her husband's concern. She kissed Andrew and whispered thank you. "I really like your decision." The man gave his wife an answering kiss. "Now we can think about procreation. Or we may not be able to produce 3 hairs in the new apartment. They will have room to run wild." The happy woman then did not pay attention to the fact that her husband had registered a new apartment. She thought it was normal that all the finances in the family were somehow unnoticeably taken over by Andrew. The husband was well aware of the schedule of advances and received, and these days he waited for his wife in the hallway. So Jenna deposited in our piggy bank all the coins and rubrics, and the woman willingly gave her husband all her hard-earned money. Only once she dared to disobey her spouse, and on the way home went to a department store to buy herself some lingerie. When Andrew was short of the amount due, he went green with anger. "Jenna is missing here. I signed the statements, and I know how much you're supposed to get." The woman tossed carelessly. "Andrew, this is too much. I went to the store, bought what I needed. Do I really need to ask your permission to buy underwear? Or are you going to buy me my own lingerie and hygiene products?" The man wasn't the least bit embarrassed. "If I have to, I'll go shopping myself." At some point, Jenna realized that her husband considered her an appendage. For a while, she tried to object, but Andrew paid no attention to her outbursts. Then the feeling of despair was replaced by apathy. But Jenna tried to ignore the sudden deterioration of her health. The medical staff became alarmed when the woman was undergoing a medical commission for employment. The therapist looked at her strangely and said, "Jenna, you need to urgently retest and undergo a more detailed examination." She smiled at the doctor. "Okay, I'll do all that. What do you say?" The doctor told her to come back in 3 days. Jenna was in high spirits when she knocked on the door of the already familiar doctor's office, trying not to look her in the eye. "Jenna, my worst suspicions have been realized. You need to see a hematologist right away. I'm anemic again. You've had this problem before." "Yes. When I was a kid, I drank iron and ate hematomas all the time. My mom used to buy those candy bars at the drugstore." The doctor looked at Jenna again with the same strange look. "Are you anemic?" "Unfortunately, it's much worse than that. I'm not gonna lie to you. If the diagnosis is confirmed, there will be a long treatment." A smile seemed to be glued to the woman's face. She took the referral and thanked the doctor. In the hallway, Jenna sat down on the couch and read the short note in illegible handwriting. Although she had no understanding of medicine at all without labor, she realized that it was about a qualitative blood disorder. She returned home in a state of utter devastation. Andrew cheerfully asked, "But what did they tell you?" through the pause. "Nothing good." The woman handed her husband a referral for hospitalization. For about 5 minutes he studied the doctor's conclusion, and then with her optimistically, said, "Doctors often make mistakes, so I see no reason for despondency. Lie down for a week, take some pills, and everything will be back to normal." But Jenna had her first round of chemo, then she was given a second round, and Andrew's optimism began to wane, and it was replaced by irritation. One day, the man blamed his wife without a shadow of embarrassment for her illness. "It's your own fault, Jenna, for the slightest trifle. You take everything to heart." The woman looked at her husband with surprise. "And you didn't think that the cause of my illness is my work in the new shop? By the way, you're the one who sent me there for the big bucks." Things were getting heated. Men were angry. "But sex with your wife? You're not a little girl. You could have said no. And anyway, when I married you, I didn't think I'd have to run around the hospital with handbags. If I understood you correctly, Andrew, you also reproached me that in my illness he carelessly threw. Understand as you wish." All inside the unhappy woman shuddered. Jenna did not want to believe that she had lived 5 years with such a monster. In the memory surfaced moments of their life together, which should have alerted her even earlier, but she did not attach importance to them. Only now she realized the true meaning of that common phrase: to be there for each other in both sorrow and joy. Jenna realized that Andrew did not want to share her misfortune. He only wanted the joys. Andrew, energetic gait, walked down the long corridor of the medical facility. The man wrinkled his nose unhappily, covering his nose with a handkerchief. He was irritated by the pungent hospital odors. Near the door, with the sign of the head of the department, he stopped and knocked. After approvingly, "You enter." A man opened the door. "I'm Jenna's husband. The nurse told me you wanted to talk to me." An elderly man in a surgical suit looked up from his papers. Yes, sir. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. Please sit down." "It's all right. I can stand." The doctor looked at the visitor with a scrutinizing gaze. "Are you in a hurry?" Andrew felt uncomfortable and a little hungry. "But I can stay longer if the business requires it." The doctor shook his head regretfully. "If you classify your wife's health as an everyday matter, then you can put it that way, according to the terminology you have chosen. Jenna is not doing very well, to put it mildly, or rather very badly. So you'd better sit down. I'll try not to take up too much of your time. You have a lot of time." Andrew slowly lowered himself into the chair. "What's so serious? You don't come in here for nothing. In this particular case, your wife, the situation is extremely troubling. 2 previous courses of chemotherapy did not give the expected result. The disease is progressing. I have a disappointing prognosis for you." Andrew sensed the note and loosened the knot of his tie. "Are you saying that my wife will die?" The superintendent suddenly laughed. "We all die sometime. Unfortunately, that's the law of nature. The whole point of this law is that some people manage to use up all their allotted time limit, while others pass away soon after the start. And my wife falls into that second category. If I understand you correctly. That's correct. The woman is only 26 years old. That's her prime. She should be having babies and making you happy. We've tried twice to stop this process, but so far we've had no success. That's why we made a collegial decision to change the treatment regimen. I will not hide from you this method is more rigid and therefore fraught with the development of side effects. Andrew interrupted cheekbones, and in what form these side effects will be expressed. The doctor hummed again. Of the most striking is partial baldness. That is, baldness. Also often in such patients there is a sharp weight loss, may appear and other complications, but with a favorable course of all these changes will be temporary. Andrew, holding his breath, asked. Otherwise, the doctor sharply unfolded his hands. Alas, the organism of each person is individual, and it is impossible to predict in advance how successful the treatment will be. Therefore, we can only hope for a positive outcome, but no doctor can give any guarantees. Andrew looked at the doctor with all his eyes, and his imagination was already drawing terrible pictures of the future. These fantasies were so realistic that he did not restrain himself from screaming. It seems to me that you are deliberately mocking me. After all, there are means to avoid the worst-case scenario. There can't be no worst-case scenario. There must be something you can do. The doctor calmly replied, I understand how you feel, but don't overreact. And as for whether there is anything that can be done to save your wife, I will say that such opportunities exist. Our Israeli colleagues have a wealth of experience in hematology. This is the name of the field dealing with the treatment of diseases of the blood organs, creation. Andrew impatiently interrupted the superintendent. I'm not that dormant. I understand medical terminology. I would not like to learn more about such treatment. I think there's no need to delve into the methodology itself. But the results are impressive. Up to 70% survival rate is a very solid figure. So 100% recovery is not expected. And how much would a course of such treatment cost? The head of the department said the amount, and Andrew felt the hair on the top of his head stirring. Just in case, he asked again how much. Keeping a nonchalant look, the doctor repeated the visitor's answer. For a while he was in a state of stupor. He did not even blink and was afraid to move in his chair. When the stupor subsided, Andrew jumped up. Thank you for the useful information, but we don't have that kind of money. We could buy an apartment or a car with that kind of money. To save the people closest to you, many people sacrifice comfort and sell their last home. Think about it. It seems astronomical at first. But if you put everything in its place, you can always find a way out of a difficult situation. Andrew waved his head several times. Doctor, do you have any idea what you're talking about? If I didn't, I wouldn't have even mentioned this one possibility to save your wife. In fact, if I were in that kind of trouble, I wouldn't hesitate to take off my shirt and sell everything. I have nothing more to say to you. The conversation with the head of the ward made such a strong impression on Andrew that he forgot to look in his wife's room. He remembered this omission as he raced at top speed toward the house, clutching or wincing his fingers. He kept saying, I must think things over calmly. Familiar with the home environment, the man was immediately relieved. He poured into a glass of white wine and drank the entire portion in a volley. This drink worked instantly, and Andrew felt relief. He drank another glass of wine to consolidate the result. My thoughts gradually began to come to order, and my wife's illness receded into the background. If I sold the car and the apartment, I wouldn't have enough to pay for Jenna's treatment. And then there was no guarantee that she would fully recover to live the rest of her life in poverty with a sick wife. It's not a pleasant prospect for me. I'm not 30 yet. That means that all the most interesting things are ahead of me. And after all, there are other women besides Jenna, like Camille. Andrew caught himself that he began to think about this nice girl more and more often. And he didn't just think of Camille, he imagined her in Jenna's place. Camille had come into his life recently. This girl was the adopted daughter of William, with whom Andrew had a strong business relationship. although the famous businessman was almost twice his age. This age difference was not felt. William trusted the young deputy completely and even once admitted that he wanted to buy out the concern completely. "Andrew, you are the only one I can trust with my deepest dream. I know that you will not let me down and our friendship will continue in the future, but I want to see you not only as a friend and companion, but something more." The young man understood what the businessman was implying, but pretended to be a fool. "William, you are like a businessman father to me," he laughed. "I wish I had a son like that, but I've been unlucky in that respect. Of course, there are alternative ways of strengthening family ties, but as I know, you are already legally married." Andrew's silly giggle. "Yeah, well, we all make mistakes when we're young. I got married in a hurry, too, but it's a mistake that can always be corrected." William looked at his young friend for a long time, then said for the first time, "I heard that marriage is a misunderstanding, but I like your approach to life. I respect determined people, and I am ready to applaud you too." Andrew took the entrepreneur's last words as a call to action and began to hatch plans to divorce Jenna. But there was one thing stopping him, and it was not his wife's illness. The man really did not want to lose everything he had gained at his apartment, car, and other pleasant privileges. Andrew well understood that if he left Jenna in such a critical situation, at one point his reputation would collapse, and this would negatively affect his career. Then William himself would be the first to point him out the door. Marriage to his adopted daughter would be forgotten forever. We'd have to come up with something that wouldn't let a mosquito in. And so it was found. Andrew was surprised at first that it was possible to resolve a difficult situation so quickly and practically without losses. The man did not notice how the previously favorite woman suddenly turned into a problem for him, which he wanted to get rid of by any means. As iron must be forged before it gets cold, Andrew decided to visit his wife first. When he arrived, Jenna cheerfully exclaimed, "Andrew, you've been gone so long. You're in trouble." A sharp needle pricked him, and he was suddenly pricked with shame. But that feeling was quickly hidden by the pressure of an inner voice. "Stop embarrassing yourself like a young lady. You're doing the right thing, because in this crazy world, the strongest man wins. The truth is always on the side of the strongest." Of course, he didn't say those words out loud. He crouched down next to his wife and began stroking her worsted hand affectionately. The husband questioned the sick woman about business. Jenna laughed. "Andrew, what business can a hematology patient have? Departments. I've been lying here for over a month from constant surveillance. My hair's starting to fall out. I'm so anxious to go home." The man scrutinized the woman's agitated face and realized with horror that there was almost nothing left of that former cheerful Jenna. On his wife's face appeared a thin grid of wrinkles, and her eyes glistened with feverish fire. Only a pathetic semblance was left of her luxurious coiffure, and her hair was rotten and resembled a wig in appearance. In addition to all of the above changes, Jenna had lost a great deal of weight. She could hardly keep her balance, and while walking she held on to the walls or the back of the bed with her hand. She spoke little because she quickly tired and began to choke. There was a moment when Andrew thought his wife smelled the odor of earth. The sensation was so unpleasant that it made him shudder. Jenna immediately asked Andrew anxiously, "What's wrong?" He smiled through the force and drew his wife to him. "I'm fine. It's just that there's a draft in your room. I don't want you to catch a cold on top of all your other problems. It's coming from the hallway, but it's a little thing I've gotten used to. Sorry I forgot to thank you for the private room. It's a little boring, but there's no one to mess with your head. Jenna, I have another piece of encouraging news to tell you. I spoke to your doctor recently, and he recommended a clinic in Israel." The woman froze. She looked at her husband with horror for 2 minutes, and then quietly, even pitifully said, "Andrew, but you and I do not have such money, and I've almost found the right amount. I was promised to subsidize my partner and colleague William. That's the businessman you met 2 years ago, before my illness. He is." Andrew lied inspirationally. Jenna looked at him with a devoted gaze. Suddenly, she leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and cried softly, childishly, "Andrew, honey, you have no idea what you have done for me today." The man patted the woman on the shoulder. "Darling, don't exaggerate. There's nothing special about what I did." The woman whispered fervently, "If a man doesn't realize it until he faces it himself, you gave me a ray of hope today." I was getting desperate. I started counting the days. "Do you realize what it's come to?" He stroked her back, telling her everything's gonna be all right. "Your doctor said that more than half of patients fully recover after treatment in Israel, and you will definitely get better too." Jenna calmed down a little and looked into her husband's eyes with the same look. "Andrew, and when are we going?" "Very soon we are good. I'll talk to your doctor some more, and we need to call the clinic. It'll take at most a week. Will you go to Robert's right now?" "Of course I am. After all, every day you rest, and tomorrow I will come again and tell you everything." Andrew walked his wife to the bed and kissed her goodbye. At the door, he paused for a moment. "Jenna, everything will be fine. Don't despair." After her husband left, the woman fell asleep with a smile on her lips. For the first time in her long months of illness, she was in high spirits. She trusted her husband and mentally repeated everything would be all right. Although Andrew's plans did not include a second visit to the head of the department, he decided to make amends, his wife's condition and health. The doctor fixed his sharp gaze on the visitor's face. "Unfortunately, I have nothing to report. No positive dynamics." The doctor made an expressive pause. "I'm afraid that your wife will not live more than 6 months. That's the maximum. So I suggest you hurry up and go to the Israeli clinic." "All right, doctor, I'll do my best," as Robert showed with all his appearance that the conversation was over. The man politely bowed out. At home, Andrew began to polish his plan, in which Jenna was to play the main role. For several days, the man worked out a scheme of disappearance of the woman from the clinic and tried to take into account even insignificant at first glance trifles when everything was scheduled literally by minutes. He went to the hospital, taking with him in winter clothes of the spouse. The man left his car 2 blocks from the hospital, then walked to the facility. He planned his route so that he could be seen by as many people as possible. At the sight of the long-awaited visitor, the sick woman jumped out of bed and began to fix her hair. With excitement, her face laughed sharply and only her eyes burned with that frightening glint that had struck the man last time. Jenna approached her husband and, in a half-whisper, informed Andrew, "I did everything you told me to do, but Robert was very surprised when I asked about the Israeli clinic." "That's right. Jenna, yesterday, we still haven't reached a consensus. This morning we called and dotted all the I's." The man looked at his watch defiantly and shook his head. "So you and I are running out of time. We have a plane to Tel Aviv in 2.5 hours, and we haven't even had time to go home. So you and I will bypass the formalities that are required in such cases in order to catch the flight. Give me your things. You go down the back stairs. Try not to be seen by the staff. You've got something warm to wear, and you've got Andrew." Although the ward doesn't allow woolen clothes, I hid my old carton very good under the mattress. In it, you run to the alley that adjoins the hospital grounds. All your clothes are in my car. Will you have time to change on the way? Andrew spoke quickly and assertively, so that his wife wouldn't have time to realize it. "Jenna, you'll get there without help. You realize we shouldn't go in together. They'll start asking you where you're going. And you and I are definitely not gonna make it. We already have appointments at the best clinics, and we can't be late. Andrew, I'll do it. What did you say?" I managed to get a key to the back door. I took it off the nurse's binder. They were running around outside. The man's a ringing smacker, but he's still giving his wife a peck on the cheek. Let's not take too long. He leisurely left the ward and headed for the duty nurse's post. "Here's some tea for you girls." A beautiful box of chocolates brought the medical staff. Delight. "Oh, a real squirrel with nuts. You can't get candy like that nowadays." This is a special gift for the beautiful angels in white coats. Thank you." The girls thanked Andrew with one voice, and without waiting for him to leave, ran to the back room to put the kettle on. The man hurried to the elevator. He got out and through the center doors hurried to the alley where his car was parked. Jenna appeared 5 minutes later. She was breathing noisily, indicating that even this short trip had been very difficult for her. "I hope I'm not too late." "Well done, you did a great job. There's a fur coat, warm boots, and other civilized clothes. I'm taking off all my hospital clothes and putting them in a bag. I'll return the property to the ward later." Jenna did not pay attention to the road. The most important thing for her now was to follow all her husband's instructions clearly. But still she timidly asked Andrew, "We'll stop for a snack on the way, because I was left without a wife today." The man didn't even turn around. "You shouldn't have. We should have eaten. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, but we can get something at the airport. You get some rest. You can even Nokia for half an hour." The woman was surprised. "Then the airport is no more than 10 minutes away. The main highway has been closed for repairs. We'll have to take the county road." Repairs in winter, you'd be surprised. In our country, everything impossible becomes possible. The car rolled smoothly along the road, and Jenna quickly fell asleep, but in her mind the timekeeping was counting seconds and minutes. At some point the woman awakened abruptly and asked Andrew with concern in her voice, "Has it been more than half an hour, or am I imagining it?" "You're imagining it. We'll be there soon. Don't worry." But the answer of her husband did not calm the woman, because in his voice she caught unpleasant notes. Fear began to slowly envelop her in a black veil, and her body began to shake convulsively. Jenna nestled against the window, but the panes were covered with a thin crust of ice. The woman breathed on the glass, and with consternation, exclaimed to Andrew, "Where are we going?" "This is not the road to the airport. There are forests all around." The man answered nothing, but sharply increased speed. Jenna clutched the back of the driver's seat with her hands. "Andrew, why are you silent? What are you up to?" Without turning around, he yelled, "Get your hands off me. Not only are you standing on the edge of the grave, but you want to drag me down with you." A terrible realization flashed through the woman's mind. "Andrew, you can't do this to me. I trusted you. You promised you'd take me to the clinic." He grinned gloatingly, assuming I'd kept my promise. "This is your clinic. Here you will fully recover your health. I don't need a sick wife. I'm a healthy man, and I want to see the same healthy woman next to me." The car braked sharply. A man jumped out on the road and rushed to the back door. "Get out. This is your stop." The woman struggled, but the odds were stacked against her. "Andrew, you and your wife out of the car." And she dragged you into the woods. "I'm sorry, Jenna, but it's better for both of us. And you suffer, and I don't have to do the heavy lifting." Andrew pulled his burden to a small clearing, hiding between the pines, and tossed Jenna carelessly into the snow. Andrew felt an extraordinary exhilaration. His whole being exulted, and the inner voice cheerfully said, "You're good, Andrew. You got rid of unnecessary ballast." The man ran to his car, drowning knee-deep in snow. He did not look back once, for he was afraid that the sight of his helpless wife would awaken pity in his heart. At that moment he did not think that he had committed a terrible sin for which he would one day have to pay. Despite the fact that the plan had been checked to the last detail, Andrew did not remember the place where he had left his wife, so he was surprised that the return trip took several hours. "How far I've traveled." At first the man regretted that it hadn't occurred to him to check the route with the map, but later he thought it was even better. "If I had the urge to go back, I wouldn't have found the woods where I'd left Jenna." As soon as he entered the city, he stopped at the first dumpster and dumped the rest of his wife's things in the tank. That's it. Now everything was in order. Getting to the apartment, Andrew drank half a glass of strong drink. It helped the man to calm down. He ate a hearty dinner and turned on the TV to distract himself from troubling thoughts. Well-behaved man went to work in the morning. Toward noon, William himself came to his office. William gave Andrew a fatherly hug. Said my friend with a look of reproach, "You disappeared from my sight so suddenly yesterday that I was worried. Did something happen to you?" The businessman's small eyes took in the young man's face, but he held that look. "You know my wife is in the hospital. I've been visiting her." Yes, I'm aware of that circumstance. I'm very sorry for your loss. I hope our medical staff can help her." "I'd like to hope so too. But alas, my wife's condition worsens every day. Even the most advanced treatments are failing. Yesterday I spoke to the attending physician, and he told me frankly that at best she could survive for 6 months." William averted his eyes, but a smile flashed across his face. But William quickly pulled himself together, and a look of compassion came over his face. "It's very hard to watch a loved one suffer. I too have suffered the same fate. My mother died of cancer. But you, Andrew, do not despair. You are still a young man, and you have the best ahead of you." Andrew thanked his older comrade for his support, and William hurried off. He would have been happy to stay longer, but it's business. "Andrew, you don't wallow in your grief. It's dangerous. Come and see us this evening for an after-hours chat. I hope you haven't forgotten my address." The young man felt awkward, but it quickly passed, and he confidently replied, "I have a very good visual memory. I will definitely come to see you." And barely had the door closed behind William when the phone rang. Andrew thought that the chief or the chief accountant was looking for him. But from the receiver came a husky male voice. "Andrew, it's you from the hospital." His heart jumped frantically in the man's chest, but he calmly answered, "Yes, I'm listening to you, Robert. Is something wrong?" "I'm not sure yet. That's why I'm calling you. The thing is, Jenna disappeared, and we thought she was home. After all, you visited her last night." Andrew screamed. "Disappeared how? Doctor, you must have thought to play a joke on me. What are you doing? What kind of a joke? This is a first for us. I'm not interested in how many cases like this have happened in your hospital. I want to know where my wife is. She's in no condition to run away. And you know that very well." Andrew yelled into the phone, and the head of the department did not even try to justify his staff, who noticed the disappearance of the patient only in the morning. And also when developing his plan, Andrew took this moment into account and prepared well for it. Immediately after the superintendent's call, he went to the hospital, where police officers were already interviewing the staff and patients. The man so firmly entered the role of an indignant husband that he even began to express his dissatisfaction with the law enforcement representative. "Can you please explain to me how this could have happened? I left at 7 p.m. and Jenna," meaning my wife, was in bed at that point. "One investigator was hurriedly recording my husband's statement, and the other was trying to calm him down. I understand you perfectly well, but if you can, tell me more about last night." Andrew concentrated frowned. He described his last visit in chronological order. At the end of his narrative, he let out a stingy male tear. "Find my wife. A terminally ill woman could not disappear without a trace. She could hardly move around the ward. I don't buy the escape theory. They're not the ones hiding something." The angry man pointed his finger at the ward staff, frozen in a daze. The senior operative promised, "Our officers have already started the search. Will we keep you informed? Leave us your cell phones." Andrew held out a notebook and a sheet of paper. "Here's a home office phone number. Call me any time of day or night. Please find my wife. She and I were supposed to go to an Israeli clinic the other day." Robert gave him a cursory glance, but Andrew had clearly worked out that he had indeed made an arrangement with a foreign clinic. He thought with satisfaction, "Check all you want. I've covered everywhere I can." Andrew had completely ruled out the possibility that Jenna would suddenly be found alive and unharmed. After all, the thermometer had dropped below 20 degrees last night. The man was sure that the terminally ill woman froze in the same clearing where he left her. After returning home, Andrew changed his clothes and, as if nothing had happened, went to visit William. He tried to be sad, which did not prevent him from actively grooming the nickname. William watched the young couple all evening, and as the guest hurried home, he gave him the same fatherly hug. "Hold on, Andrew. And do you know that the doors of our house are always open to you?" When the door closed behind the guest, William said to his wife, a very dodgy lad, "I think this is the most successful party for our knee." The businessman's wife also liked Andrew, but even if she had a negative impression of him, she would not dare to say it out loud. In Camille's house, only William decided everything and everyone. Jenna. She didn't want to believe that everything was happening to her. When her husband had left her for dead in the winter woods near the pine trees, she had tried to stop him with a plea for help. But the words stuck in her throat. The woman wanted to get up, but immediately fell into the snow. She saw Andrew running away from the scene of his crime. The world collapsed before the eyes of the unfortunate woman. From the excitement, Jenna briefly lost consciousness. When the woman regained the ability to assess the situation sensibly, she heard the snow creaking somewhere not far away. It sounded very much like the footsteps of a man, only fainter. For some reason, Anna's advice came to her mind, and Jenna grabbed a nearby thick branch. With great difficulty, the woman stood up and leaned on this aid. The creaking of snow could be heard very close by, and it first doubled, then settled. The woman almost screamed with horror. Seeing in 20 meters from herself burning lights, she felt her body instantly covered with sticky. Then frozen lips whispered soundlessly, "Wolves. How many of them are there? Mommy, Daddy, help me, Jenna." Suddenly, a recent dream came to mind, which Maria had easily deciphered. It was indeed a dream. Jenna could no longer hear her voice and was about to panic. But at this critical moment from the distant past again surfaced the image of Anna Davidovna. "If your granddaughter happens to meet a wolf, never look into his eyes. This beast will recognize by his eyes that a person is afraid of him, and then there's a good chance he'll attack first." 10-year-old Jenna then cheerfully replied to her grandmother, "I run so fast that no wolf can catch up with me. I'm always first in school in competitions. I run to the finish line." Grandma shook her head. "It's different in life. Fear paralyzes a person, but even a well-prepared athlete is unlikely to be able to compete with the forest beast, because in just half an hour, an adult wolf is able to overcome a distance of 10 kilometers. This is equivalent to the result of a human riding a bicycle." Jenna then, to the depths of consciousness, struck by this information, and her optimism quickly faded. "Grandma Anna, then it turns out that there is no escape from wolves at all. Why not? If you behave correctly, that is, do not turn your back to the beast and do not provoke him, he will not attack. If the wolf is alone, it can be frightened." Jenna looked in the direction from which the deadly danger was coming and tried to count the burning lights. At the number 12, she lost count. In the inflamed brain flashed God, "There is a whole pack of them, and a stick will hardly help me." Gathering her last strength, the woman shouted tales with a stick. "I'm not afraid of you. Get out of here." The wolves looked at the woman with surprise, but they were not going to disperse, although there was almost no hope of rescue. But still Jenna believed in a miracle. She noticed that her cry had made the predators uneasy. That gave her confidence, and she screamed again, but louder. "What are you looking at me for? Get out of here." The wolves snarled, stepped back a little. Jenna made a third decisive attempt and screamed at the top of her lungs for help. Her call for help was louder than the predators. The wolves stomped around some more and ran away. Jenna covered her eyes for a few seconds, and her senses sharpened to the extreme. She heard the distant footsteps of the predators and breathed a sigh of relief. But immediately, very different footsteps were heard. Heavy and confident, the woman opened her eyes and saw a huge silhouette approaching her. In her head flashed Hubert. A black veil spread before her eyes, and she fell unconsciously on the snow. Jenna woke up from the pleasant warmth that caressingly touched her whole body. She didn't want to open her eyes because she was afraid of scaring away the warmth. A peacefulness came to her hearing. Snippets of firewood and such familiar household sounds as the whistle of a boiling kettle and the clinking of dishes. She slowly covered her eyes and gaze immediately came across the wooden ceiling. A sigh of relief involuntarily escaped from her chest. Just like in Anna's house, from the side of the headboard came a pleasant male baritone. "You've come to your senses." Jenna saw the face of a man about 35 years old above her. "You as beauties have slept for more than 24 hours. But that's not surprising, considering where and under what circumstances I found you." The woman tried to say something, but the man made a warning gesture. "The most important thing for you right now is rest. When you're a little stronger, you'll be sure to tell me everything. In the meantime, I'll entertain you, mysterious stranger, with conversation. Of course, if you do not mind this order." The woman smiled and whispered quietly, "I'm in favor of it." The man shook his head. "Oh, you've forgiven on top of that. Your voice is hoarse. But don't worry, you're in good hands. Allow me to introduce myself. David, by education I am a doctor-surgeon, but at the moment I am forced, professional, downtime. In other words, while not working about the reason, until I will not spread, so as not to bore you with unnecessary details." The man disappeared briefly and soon reappeared with a mug, over which a fragrant smoke was rising. So the first official part is over. Now let's move on to the practicalities. You should try to drink this potion. Helps you from almost any ailment. Let me help you into a comfortable position. David gently lifted the entourage and brought the mug to her lips. "Drink carefully in small dots." The women swallowed the slightly cotton wool hot liquid through force. "It tastes like a drink my grandma Anna liked to drink. She called it a tea of longevity, and she prepared it from some herbs and made sure to add its needles." The man looked at the guest with surprise. "Oh, you even spoke clearly. It means that our business will go further only with a plus sign. By the way, you have almost completely guessed the recipe of my bread brew. It was given to me by a guy. We served together." David took the mug from Jenna's hands and sat down next to Sobchak, on whom Jenna was lying. "Don't consider it immodesty on my part, but if I hadn't shown up in time at that clearing, you would have definitely become prey to a wolf pack. The predators have recently begun to raid our village on a regular basis. Apparently, they're having trouble finding food. They had a leader, such a hardy wolf cleaner. Our men tried to eliminate him and set traps. No results. Although I have a small farm, roosters and 2 hens are not dry. My neighbors gave me a divorce, but it's still a pity to lose this livestock." David threw wood into the stove and went back to the bed of the sick woman. "I've only recently settled here. The second winter. Pardon the tautology. I'm settling in a little. I've got a bird. And in the fall Jack came to me, a very nice dog from a far corner of a simple village hut. A powerful dog barking was heard." Jenna turned her head with difficulty and saw a huge shaggy dog. "Oh, does your Jack look like a Rex? That was my grandmother's dog's name, but that was a long time ago." The short monologue was given to the woman with great difficulty, and she lowered her head on the pillow. Apparently, the Munchkin liked the fact that the guest paid attention to his person to establish good relations as soon as possible. The dog licked Jenna's hand and settled down next to the chin. David remarked with satisfaction, "Such a smart dog surprises me every day. Last night he started running around the house and barking too. I thought he was doing his own thing, but Jack started tugging at my sheepskin coat, and I guessed he was calling me." Jenna looked at the coat rack where the said piece of hostess attire was hanging. The sheepskin coat was brown in color, so Jenna mistook her savior for a bear. Meanwhile, David continued to praise his 4-legged pet. "Jack has that kind of intuition. After all, from the house to the place where we found you is almost 2 kilometers. He ran like a seasoned sprinter, and with a single spurt he unleashed his voucher." Jack stretched out over the stone mat, showing off his powerful paws. Jenna mouthed only his nickname with a smile. "You didn't pick it well. He's too big for Jack." After the table, a pleasant snowy feeling spread over the woman's body, and she fell asleep again. For almost 2 weeks, Jenna did not get out of bed. The owner of the little hut did not leave her side. He kept her drunk with various real ones, repeating each time, "Since you refuse to eat and will have to drink more. We did not save you to die of exhaustion, Jenna." David was hardly ever silent. He knew many interesting and instructive stories. "You know, Jenna, I have always dreamed of continuing the dynasty of doctors. There are 4 generations of doctors in our family, so I was predestined at birth to become a military doctor. I don't want to bore you with a long narrative, but I have been to different places, and everywhere I learned something new." The woman asked with interest to prepare various potions. "Did you also learn on such expeditions?" David wondered. An interesting interpretation. I never thought that the work of a military surgeon could be called such a peaceful expedition term. There's something to it, though. And so, Jenna, have you hit the mark? Thanks to my varied life, I've mastered a dozen related specialties. Familiarized myself with the secrets of Tibetan medicine, mastered needle therapy. God, when did you have time for all this? Jenna, you have no idea what hidden abilities each person has. We use no more than 5 or at best 10% of all available resources in our lifetime, hence all the health problems. After all, it is proven that a person can heal himself, and even from incurable diseases. Holding her breath, Jenna waited for an answer. David looked at her and immediately understood everything. "Do you have this kind of problem?" I immediately did not like your pale and obvious equipment, but to ask about such things, especially a woman, is indecent, so I tried to temper my curiosity. Jenna told him her unhappy story. When David found out her husband's dastardly deeds, he wasn't even surprised. Unfortunately, human meanness is quite common, and in the last 10 years, it's become an epidemic. You were abandoned in a helpless state by your husband. I was betrayed by a comrade I rescued. The man threw off his shirt and turned his back to Jenna. See the blue scar under his right shoulder blade? Yes, David pulled his shirt back on. I don't want to flaunt my torso in front of you because it's not etiquette. But if you'd like, I can tell you the story of how I acquired the mark. Of course you can. It was a little over 3 years ago, during the famous events in the East. We were working in military field conditions. That is, intense. There was a wild lack of working hands, and our nurses had to assist doctors during the most complicated operations. And then I was lucky enough to be sent an assistant. I rejoiced wildly at this fact alone. When I saw Zach, a fellow student at the academy, I was doubly happy. No sooner had we expressed our delight at the unexpected encounter. The enemy started firing. I had already gotten used to this music, but Vasca was in extreme conditions for the first time. Anyway, while we were exchanging pleasantries, they whistled very close, and I already knew by the sound what kind of stuff was flying towards us. I knocked Zach down on the floor and fell on top of him. That's what hit me. If it hadn't been for the fortune teller, it would have ended sadly. Jenna looked at her savior with undisguised admiration. It turns out that you have already saved more than one life. What can you do? It's my job. And your friend, what about him? David laughed childishly. Not a scratch on Zach. But it soon turned out my friend had a rotten soul. He set me up big time. It was his doing. I was banned from practicing medicine for 5 years. To make a long story short, he screwed me over big time. More specifically, he slandered me. There was a trial and all the consequences. I don't want to remember those events. David's story hit Jenna so hard, she slipped into the first person. How did you handle it? What other choice did I have? You're right. You could have grabbed a drink, but that's the last thing you want to do. And then I had a desire to find that bastard. The woman asked in surprise. Why? Just to look him in the eye. I didn't want to tell you, but since we're being honest, I'll tell you. My friend not only deprived me of the opportunity to work in my specialty, he also stole my favorite woman from under my nose. We've been living in a common law relationship for almost 5 years. Never had time to formalize the relationship. She's a doctor too. I'm sorry, but if she had true love, she would have switched sides. You're right, Jenna. I've always come to that conclusion myself when I've been going over things in my head. You know, the hardest thing is fighting injustice alone. Everyone looks at you and laughs. They think you're stupid. Confession didn't come easy to David. It was as if he was ashamed of his past. And Jenna clearly felt it. To relieve hung in the air tension. The woman said with a smile, "We have the same blood as in the cartoon about Mowgli." That's a good point. So we both have things to do, like supporting each other. Of course, I'm not imposing. It's your choice. I'm in. I don't have much time left anyway. David didn't let her finish her sentence, so I'll never, ever hear you panic speak again. Do you understand me? Jenna whispered softly. Yeah, that's great. I have a friend working in Canada who is an excellent specialist. A little stronger, lower, let's go to him. Jenna intuitively felt that from that moment on she was starting a whole new life. Now the future no longer seemed so hopeless to her. As she fell asleep that night, she thought, if God gives me a year or two of happy life, I will be grateful to him for this favor. And the Almighty heard the sick woman's plea and gave her many years of life near the man she loved. Jenna was washing the window half-heartedly, humming a popular song. The apartment was still a mess. David had to maneuver between boxes to reach his wife. Jenna, I didn't realize you had vocal abilities. The woman looked away from her work for a few seconds. David, are you kidding me? When I was a kid, a bear stepped on both ears and stomped on them. If I sing at the top of my voice, the neighbors will think what happened. A disaster. The man laughed. It seems to me that you come by your virtues. On the contrary, I assess them very objectively. Help me. The woman gave her husband her hand and carefully climbed down from the windowsill. David kissed her tenderly. Jenna, you smell of spring deer. That's the scent of window cleaner. Someone has to clean this apartment. Tony's been missing for days at a time. You've been in your department 24 hours a day too. And I'm the one who's got to pick up the slack. It's been 2 months since we moved in, and the apartment's like a train station. Jenna made a naked grimace, and David laughed. You know how to press your conscience, I promise. No, I swear I'll leave the furniture on the nail wall next weekend and do all the man's work. Okay, I'll take you at your word. And don't forget you made a vow. Jenna saw her husband off and wanted to get on with the job, but the urge to clean the windows was gone. She sat down on a stool, gathered tape from a pile of boxes. What do we have here? Here we have family heirlooms. They were hastily preparing to move to a new place, so they didn't have time to sign all the boxes. David didn't care about the process at all. Jenna, why the hell do we have to bring all this stuff with us if we can buy everything we need on the spot? This attitude towards the things that were dear to her heart even offended the woman. David, we are, as you put it, junk. We haven't chewed it in over 2 decades. And I'm superstitious. My grandmother told me that many things serve as banks, so they should be treasured. Such a reverent attitude to everyday objects, Jenna appeared after the miraculous healing. She often caught herself thinking that everything from the moment she met David began to carry a symbolic, if not sacred meaning. Although the man himself had been deeply hurt by fate, he had given up personal comfort for her sake. David took the terminally ill woman to an acquaintance in Canada. Jenna there underwent a full examination and for the first time heard from the same doctor encouraging conclusions. It's not that bad. Our clinic has developed a new method, but it has not yet found widespread use. If you ladies agree, then we will try the effectiveness of this method. Jenna agreed without hesitation. Doctor, I have no choice. If there's even one chance, I have to take it. Already after 2 weeks, David's friend Vovka noticed with satisfaction that my method was working. Look at the tests of your wife. Jenna looked at her benefactor with surprise, but he did not even wiggle an eyebrow. He stared at the results of the blood test. Andrew is not modest, and we have a genius. My wife has had several rounds of chemotherapy. It's an old regimen, and it's not always effective. and there are too many barrels. I recently attended a conference with colleagues in Kazakhstan. They also have a breakthrough in cancer treatment, but they have not yet patented their method. We've already done all the tests. Now we're waiting for approval. Men began to discuss professional issues with passion, and Jenna distractedly thought about the strangeness of her fate. After all, the fact that her lawful husband had abandoned her and a complete stranger had come to her aid could not be called anything other than the will of Providence. When the men finished talking, and Jenna asked David, "Explain why you called me wife." The man looked at her with a look that penetrated into her very soul. "Does it make you uncomfortable? To be honest, I haven't had time to realize everything so suddenly. You know, it's a complete surprise to me too. It just came out. But it doesn't seem random to me. Think about it. It's no accident that life brought us together. You and I are two lonely people. Maybe we should create something strong and warm together. Let's give it a try." In such an original form, David proposed to Jenna. While the woman was undergoing treatment in the clinic, he worked part-time on the ambulance as a paramedic. Later, a friend helped him to recover in the profession. Difficulties with the couple arose when they decided to sign. Since Jenna already had a stamp in her passport, she decided through a lawyer to file for dissolution of marriage with Andrew. And that's where the confusion began. The lawyer's inquiry received a reply that Jenna was presumed dead. Not only that, but it turned out that her husband had searched for her, but to no avail. Therefore, she was declared missing after the expiry of the deadline, and her ex-husband had already remarried. Jenna had to prove that she was alive. A friend of David's helped her in this endeavor. When all the formalities were settled, Jenna confessed, "You know, David, for me the most undesirable thing is to return again to the city where I was betrayed. It hurts to think about it. You don't. I know it's very hard. But if you keep looking back, you're gonna miss the future." You know what I mean? Jenna knew very well what those words meant. At first it was very difficult for her to get used to her new life. But after the birth of her son Tony, everything fell into place. Of course, sometimes the past broke into the new life, but it happened less and less often. When David was offered a transfer to the city where Jenna used to live, the man decided to consult with his wife. "Jenna, here's the thing. I don't know where to start." The woman smiled. "Start with the main thing. It'll be easier that way. You're right, as always. I've been offered the position of chief physician at the new clinic. But there is one thing. Jenna's getting suspicious. What is this clinic is in that city you don't want to remember?" The woman was silent for a long time, and he waited for her answer. Finally, Jenna, "You are a man," smiled. "David, I guess this is another trial I am destined to go through." "Jenna, you are catching up with the mystical fog again. It's just a coincidence. If you're against the move, I'll back out tomorrow." "No, David, you don't have to back out. You've done so much for me. I don't want to interfere with your career. Besides, the past is long gone. How many years has it been? I'm just afraid our son won't like the idea of moving. But Tony's taking the news very well. Yeah, I don't really give a shit. I'll be able to finish my studies in Canada or move to a 7-seat institute if Dad helps." Of course, David couldn't turn down a small request from his only son. But everything was so fortunate that he did not have to use his connections to solve this important issue. Tony was immediately enrolled in university at the Department of Computational Mathematics. In short, everything was going well at the new place. Jenna smiled at her thoughts and pushed aside a box of dishes. If my men had put together a wall and a closet, I'd be quietly arranging the dishes right now. We'll probably live among these boxes for a year. I'm going to have to schedule a sabbatical in the house or this process won't move forward. Jenna spoke up loudly enough. She didn't notice when a smiling Tony appeared on the doorstep. "Mom, who are you talking to?" The woman flinched. "Tony, can you scare your mother like that?" "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I hear you talking. And there's nobody in the room but you. So I thought we had a poltergeist." "Don't tell your father about the poltergeist. He'll make an appointment for both of us." "What about Mom?" there's an upside to that. Tony made a careless movement and bumped into a pyramid of boxes. The lightweight structure began to fall apart. The guy tried to hold on to the cardboard cubes, squares. There's a real otherworldly force at work in this apartment. I didn't even touch the boxes. They fell right on top of me. Jenna laughed. This is your punishment. For what? For not helping me. Let's at least sort through our luggage a little. By the way, you could not wait for your father, and you could arrange at least small furniture in your room. No problem. We'll put everything in its place. Until late in the evening, Jenna and her son tried to create some comfort in their new home. The joint work was successful, and they had an appetizing dinner. Tony remarked with amusement that Papa would come tomorrow and be surprised. But David could hardly stand on his feet from fatigue. When he came home in the morning, Jenna was even alarmed to see him in such a state. David, you're all right. You look terrible. Be thankful I'm still standing and even able to walk. What happened? I had to go to the table myself. It was a very bad case. Can you elaborate? In general, I mean, there's such a thing as doctor-patient confidentiality. Jenna pretended to be offended. If that's the case, I'll have secrets from you too. The man put a fake smile on his face. Jenna, I just don't want to tell you that. The man who was brought to us by the rescue team was literally hobbled out of the car. 8 hours we operated on him. 2 teams worked simultaneously because the scale of the damage is horrifying. One leg had to be amputated just above the knee. The man is a tough local businessman, which added even more complications. Anyway, it's a long story. And you don't need to know the details. Jenna listened to her husband, and in her eyes was horror. David, he'll live. The man was already sitting at the table in the kitchen, greedily eating a sandwich. You mean this guy? He'll live, but he won't have as much fun as he used to. Although he's not the first, and he won't be the last. I've seen worse in my line of work. This one's only got 1 leg. Jenna was not satisfied with her husband's answer, so she continued to ask him about the night patient. And who's the young one? Well, this victim. You think I looked at him? I didn't have time for that. David answered the last question with obvious irritation. Jenna had learned over the years to pick up every nuance of her husband's mood from his voice. Because the man was a balanced character, she realized that she should no longer pester him with questions. Soon this story with an unhappy businessman was forgotten, because in the family every day there were events concerning the closest circle of people. Life in the new place was gradually getting better. When the apartment was put in order, Jenna became bored. And one day during dinner she said to her husband, David, I've had enough of being a housewife. I'm going to look for some work. How do you feel about that? Positive. If you want, I'll help you get a job. No, that's something I have to do on my own. Then do it. David never pressured his wife. Only at the very beginning of their married life did he force Jenna to get a proper profession. It was shortly after the birth of their son, and the woman was adamant about not studying. David, how do you envision this? I have a small child in my arms, and the house is on me too. What's there to study for? Men calmly listened to the fiery speech of his wife, and then said the words that Jenna remembered for the rest of her life. Even the most primitive crust gives a person a number of advantages. That's why reasonable people try to get at least some education, and then you can't predict how life will turn out. Anything can happen, and I don't want my wife to be left helpless. The woman realized that her husband was alluding to a situation from her distant past. She applied for a correspondence course, and 5 years later received a degree in economics. Many times she thanked her spouse for his insistence at that time. The day after the serious conversation, the woman first studied the list of vacancies in the city on the internet. Then she made a few calls, after which she went to the most promising, in her opinion, the employer. The company that attracted Jenna's attention was engaged in sewing and selling textile products. Perhaps her past experience in this field played a decisive role in choosing the place of work. The office was located in a new neighborhood where the surgeon's family lived. Jenna was greeted by a receptionist in the reception area. "Betty is a little busy." "That's okay, I'll wait." And there were flowers everywhere. It was this fact that pleasantly surprised the woman. The receptionist noticed the visitor's interest and proudly explained, "Betty is obsessed in a good way with indoor plants. She has a greenhouse on every floor of her house too." Jenna automatically asked, "Is your boss's house out of town?" The girl readily nodded her head. Now yes, they had to move to a country cottage after the tragedy with her husband. The secretary was ready to tell Jenna the heartwarming story of the rescue of the boss's husband. But the door of the boss's office suddenly opened, and a stern voice was heard. "Victoria, how many times have I warned you to keep your mouth shut?" The girl instantly turned red, not only her face, but also her neck and arms. Jenna had time to mentally pity amateur gossip, but at that moment she was invited into the office. "Woman, are you waiting for a special invitation? If you are about employment, come in quickly, because I have a meeting at the city hall in half an hour." Jenna went into the office and sat down on the end chair. As the hostess was examining some documents, the visitor took the opportunity to get a closer look at her future boss. Betty was about the same age as her, maybe 3 to 5 years younger. A strict suit emphasized the advantages of her figure, and the perfectly styled hair showed that this woman was meticulous about her appearance. Betty took her eyes off the papers and looked at Jenna. "And what position are you interested in?" Jenna put a packet of documents on the desk of the head of the company. "I don't care. I'll even take a job as a bookkeeper." The hostess again cast an inquisitive look at her. "Where did you work before that? What is your length of service?" "It's all written down in my workbook." Betty smiled. "Don't take offense at the dry reception. It's a necessary measure because everyone comes in. Some have no credentials at all, but they insist on claiming to be top-notch economists." Betty quickly looked through Jenna's documents and smiled again. "Go to human resources and get them processed. I hope you and I will have a fruitful partnership." The educated applicant headed for the exit, but she was caught up by the same pleasant voice of her boss. "Jenna, when can you start work?" "As soon as tomorrow. I've been dying of boredom in 4 walls for almost 4 months now." "Why'd you leave, if it's no secret?" "My husband's a surgeon, and he's been offered a job at a new clinic." There was a shadow on Betty's face, but she smiled again. "It was very nice to meet you. If you're starting your duties tomorrow, come see me first. I'll bring you up to speed. I'm new to the job myself. My husband used to run the company, but before that my father ran everything." Jenna waited for the rest of the story, but there was none. She realized that her questions in this situation would be inappropriate. At home, she pleased her husband and son. "My dear men, my period of idleness has come to an end, and tomorrow I go to work." David looked at his spouse with disbelief. "It's amazing. People can't get a job for months. But you got in at the first go, and in such a promising position. Share the secret. How did you do it?" Tony decided to put in a good word, Dad. "Don't you know how it's done? A small but preferably expensive present or a valuable envelope with a sum. That's all." The head of the family couldn't stand the insolence of his offspring. "Tony, do you have a warped perception? I have never taken money in my life, so I don't advise you to mention such things in front of me from now on." And the young man grimaced and crawled out of the table. How hard it is to live around the right people. "Dad, but it's a tried and true rule that if you don't give a hint, you don't go." David glared. Jenna had to resolve the accumulated atmosphere. There's no need to argue, and Tony Poppet is right, because you can't brush everyone under the same label. I don't know how things will work out for me in the future, but my first impressions of the company are pleasant. Jenna got involved in the work quite quickly. She diligently did all the tasks of the management and also diligently avoided close contact with the employees. She had been invited to join the company of tea drinkers on several occasions, but the woman had always politely declined. Jenna had decided before she moved that she would not renew old acquaintances, and when she got a job, she realized that new connections could also be dangerous. For a while, women still tried to bring her into their circle, but their fervor quickly waned. But Jenna heard the latest gossip. So one day, she overheard two female coworkers discussing Betty. Personally, I'm sorry. William's a normal woman, but the man's not decent. She got a kick out of that remark. Sympathetic female coworkers, the other one responded to her with undisguised snarkiness. They are all normal when they sleep with their teeth against the wall. I think all bosses are scum. Betty's hubby's in the same category. That's why he got his ass handed to him. Now he's getting what he deserves with a spoon. You can't gloat like that. Why don't you kiss him for all the nasty things you've had to put up with from him? Remember when I asked him to give me financial aid for my husband's treatment? What did he say? We're not a charity organization to throw money around. The earth is round, and everyone will get their due. And this one got his. Jenna let her guard down and carelessly moved a thick file from the desk. There was a loud pop and the women fell silent. Subsequently, the chief economist had heard such conversations more than once, and the female employees of the department shamelessly wash her bones. But Jenna tried not to pay attention to this unpleasant detail. Outside the window again raged spring, and Jenna wondered how the whole year flew by unnoticed. The long weekend was approaching, and she and her husband planned to go to the village to visit the graves of Jenna's close relatives. But unexpectedly, Tony interfered with those plans. The son showed up while the woman was preparing a meal. "Mom, where do you kill so much for a year?" Jenna looked at her son with a critical eye. "You have a short memory as a girl. I warned you that we'd go to my home village for the weekend." The young man slapped his forehead with the palm of his hand. "Exactly, Mom. I have everything out of my head. I don't have time to go to cemeteries. Tony, we had a deal." "Mammy, my circumstances have changed. I was hoping we could have a little banquet here at home." A beaming smile froze on her son's face, and Jenna realized she couldn't be angry. She sighed doomedly. "And what are we going to have a banquet in honor of?" Tony had gone into his hair. "Mom, to be honest, I don't even know how to say it. About Dad, I'm afraid to even mention it. What is this guy talking about?" First he measured, then he squeezed his eyes shut and blurted it out. "Julia and I have decided to get married." The partition nightboard slipped out of her mistress's hands and her legs became absorbent cotton. Jenna slowly lowered herself into the chair. "Okay, Tony, let's get this in order. Who is Julia? And why did you decide to marry her now?" Tony pulled up a stool. "Julia's my girlfriend. We've been dating for almost a year. She's a great girl, and we have a lot in common. Anyway, we decided we should be together." "Son, what about love? We love each other. Why wait till we're old? I'm already 22. Julia's a year younger than me. And then I'm in my last year." Jenna was in a state of stupor for a few minutes, so Tony's enthusiasm gradually wore off, and he remarked resentfully, "You're strange people. You parents only care about your own worries. I came as a human being. I shared my joy with you. And you, Mom, sit like a statue." Jenna made excuses. "It's just so sudden, son. How did Julia's parents feel about your decision?" "Bah, not yet. We were the first to know. Julia's afraid to tell their parents too. Her mom's all right. She's normal. Her father is a real satrap, even though he's disabled. Julia is terrified of him. Tony, but you're still going to have a serious conversation with your fiancé's parents someday." The boy didn't hold back, looked his mother in the eye. "Julia and I have thought of everything. You are the most reliable person, so you must help us." The woman was surprised, and what will my help consist of? Tony made himself comfortable on the stool again. "Well, for starters, you need to bring your father up to speed. And then we'll organize a little party here, invite Julia and their ancestors. In other words, you're taking it out on us, although your creative ideas are commendable. But I'm not sure my father would go for that. And then you said yourself that your girlfriend's father is disabled. Even a short trip can be a lot of trouble for someone with a disability." Tony immediately became sad. "Mom, you're right. What do you suggest we do? We should change the plan a little bit. That is, have a get-together at Julia's parents' house." Tony mumbled thanks for the advice and, with his head down, wandered back to his room. Jenna continued in a state of stupor. The only thing that was going through her mind was what family? He's just a kid. No responsibility. In the evening, Jenna told her husband everything. But unlike her, David took the news very calmly. "Jenna, don't worry. It's true. Almost all men stay boys until they're adults. Let them try to start a family. Maybe it'll work out. And if it doesn't, a man takes his wife's hands in his own." "Jenna, calm down. Realize that our son is a grown man. We don't need to patronize him and put up obstacles. If we stop him from wanting to get married now, he could end up a loner in his old age. Let's help him. By the way, I can take over the organization of the Evening of Acquaintance. I will meet with future relatives, talk to them." The woman snuggled up to her husband. "What a good man you are, aren't you? And I'm so happy I met you then. I hate to think what would have happened if it weren't for you. And don't think about it, because we agreed that you would never look back." Jenna managed to stick to this rule for a long time, but she had no idea how it would turn out for her to meet the parents of her son's fiancée. David was very surprised when he found out that the father of the very Julia and his patient, who was once put together by one and the same person, did not even know how to treat this circumstance. As the patient had a very difficult character, rather even scandalous, he literally and turned on all the nurses, and doctors too. Almost all were to blame for the fact that he will now remain an invalid. David even had to raise his voice once. "Listen to me. You were literally put together in pieces. Just by incredible labor managed to save the other leg, which, excuse me for the details, was crushed into a flapjack, flying into the cabin motor. All of this was compounded by the presence of other equally serious injuries and a very impressive amount of booze in the bloodstream. You should be thanking everyone. And you're constantly disgruntled. The nurse girls are doing their best, running in front of you, and you're hiding your anger at them." The patient averted his eyes, though the doctor could see that he wanted to argue only, and muttered, "How would you behave in my place? I was a man, and now I'm a log. I can't walk or do anything. I can't do anything." David sat down on the edge of the bed. "You're wrong. There have been prosthetic limbs for a long time. It's hard to imagine. It'll take time to heal, and then you can think about prosthetics. Yes, they're not cheap, but I understand you'll be able to afford one." After this conversation, he became much quieter. And a little while later, a woman knocked on David's door. This patient's wife. "Doctor, I'm sorry. I found out that my husband doesn't give a quiet life to anyone. I'm very ashamed of him, but I've come to apologize. Please forgive me. My husband has always had such a troubled temper." David, I could see that the woman was genuinely upset and realized that she was really ashamed. They talked for a while, and the doctor was not left with a good impression. And now it was her health that he was counting on for the difficult mission he had so recklessly undertaken. Betty came home. Andrew had been out of sorts as usual half an hour ago, but today her out of sorts were far more out of sorts than his. As usual, he began to grumble. "Nobody needs me here alone. It's the so-called daughter who's always out and about. The wife doesn't care about her husband at all. You could lie down and die." Betty wanted to talk calmly, but she couldn't. He got angry. "It's not nice when the whole world isn't at your feet, isn't it?" He looked at his spouse in surprise. He had long been accustomed to the fact that Betty had somehow withdrawn herself from any business scandals. She minded her own business, stayed out of his way, even when his father-in-law died, and his business was completely taken over. Betty didn't even try to take charge. She was perfectly content to do her daughter's charity work. "You know, being a socialite." "What do you mean? Or are you just trying to remind me that I'm not human anymore?" "You know, Andrew, I may surprise you, but your humanity doesn't depend on how many legs you have." Andrew got nervous. He didn't like it very much at all that his wife was now in charge of the factory. He'd always done everything neatly, of course, but it's all women in there. I told her something. Olia, what do you mean by that? If you've been spilled something at the factory, it's the stupidest thing in the world. To believe all sorts of gossip from people who are sticky with envy. Betty smiled. You know, Andrew, if you weren't who you are right now, I'd kick you out the door and out of my life. That he even raised his voice. Who does that woman think she is? Today I was going through some papers in the closet behind the desk. And you know, I came across a very interesting document. I can't say I was too surprised, because I've long since realized that you're the kind of person I'd expect any kind of shenanigans from. But I think it's a bit much. The company belonged to my father, and it was supposed to go to our daughter. But you've decided to reorganize it. I wonder why. Or do you think I'd disinherit my daughter? Andrew's eyes flickered. How could he forget about the fact that a year ago he had already prepared this package of documents, prepared and put them away so that when the opportunity arose, he could quickly sign them. Betty, you see, he didn't have time to finish. A housekeeper appeared on the doorstep. Betty and Andrew, you have a visitor who says he's the doctor who operated on you after the accident. They looked at each other, and Betty said inviting. To be honest, neither Betty nor Andrew understood why the doctor had come. David said hello and smiled. I'm here on a very important matter. Betty made a gesture with her hand. Please have a seat. Perhaps some tea or coffee. No, thank you very much. I'll get right to the point. The thing is, my son is dating your Yulia. Betty raised her eyebrows. Tony, your son David has raised his hands. So there you go. I'll tell you right away, and then you can answer me. Our children have decided they can't live without each other, and they need to get married. Of course, they're both still quite young. But when do you fall in love if you're not young? We wanted to invite you to our house to discuss the situation, but we thought it would be more convenient to meet at your place. David cast a quick glance at Andrew, who was already blushing with anger. To get married. When she arrives, I'll arrange it. Betty looked at him sternly, and for the first time, Andrew was embarrassed. The woman turned to David. You've thought and decided the right thing. I also think we should talk about it. Talk. Listen to the children. It's quite possible that they have very real feelings. Let's do it this way. Friday at 6 o'clock, we'll see you at our place. David realized there was something going on between the couple, perhaps a power struggle. He got up easily. Oh, good. It was nice to meet you. He walked out. Andrew angrily asked, and what was that? Betty turned to him and smiled radiantly. What was what? Our daughter is getting married, and will probably have a son-in-law to run the company. Andrew even choked with hatred and helplessness. Right, why would he need a company now that he's disabled? Jenna smiled at her husband's reflection in the mirror. But David, like you. He raised his thumb in admiration. Honestly, I don't even know what to say to you. It's like you're 20 years old. So delicate, so beautiful. No, of course you're always beautiful. But now it's like I'm younger, like I've gone back 15 years. Oh, I'm embarrassed. It's just that it's that kind of family. You have to look the part. But we're no worse. Jenna smiled, spun around. Tony walked into the room. He was wearing a suit that fit him like that one. Mom, how's it going? Well, the groom. Mom, but I'm serious. Jenna laughed, even though it was a little sad. Before she knew it, her son had grown up. It seems that not so long ago, together with the doctors, they had preserved a fragile pregnancy, which did not want to accept the unsteady body after the illness. But they managed, stood firm, and Tony appeared. All is well. Tony's son finally looked at his mother with his eyes. Wow, you're my princess. David laughed. That's what I mean. On the way, David stopped at a flower store. So, princess, you sit here while Tony and I buy flowers for Julia and her mother. Go, go, go. Jenna covered her eyes, trying not to show David that she wasn't feeling well. She hadn't slept much tonight, all because as soon as she fell asleep, she had the same dream again that she had had years ago in the hospital. Jenna jumped up. She was wet with sweat. Her body was shivering, and the small, evil, glowing eyes of the predators were in front of her eyes again. She was never able to sleep again. Memories came flooding back that hurt terribly. She couldn't understand why she was having that dream again. After all, everything was fine now. What if anything, if the disease was going to come back? After all, it happens. After many years, it just comes back and finishes what it couldn't do before. Jenna saw the men returning and smiled. No, it was just a dream after all. When you have such protectors around, nothing is scary. They drove up to a large, luxurious house. The gates swung open and the car rolled into the yard. Jenna suddenly remembered that her boss lived somewhere in this neighborhood. She turned to Tony. "Son, I didn't even ask what Julia Betty's mom's name was." Jenna laughed. "No, there's no such thing as coincidence. I mean, how small is the world?" "That looks like my boss." David looked at her in surprise, then slapped his forehead. He didn't have time to say anything, because Betty came out to meet them. Jenna smiled at her. Betty stopped in surprise. "Jenna can't be." "As you can see, it can be. Though I find myself no less surprised." Betty waved her hands. "Well, it looks like you and I are going to have to communicate even more. To be honest, I'm very happy about that. I think you and I are going to do very well together." After a brief exchange of pleasantries and flowers, Betty invited everyone to the table. David wondered where the head of the family was. He noticed the immediate gloom, but Betty replied that he would join us a little later. In fact, she didn't know if her husband would show up at all. They had a very big conversation. Not only had Betty discovered documents that lacked her signature to transfer the entire firm to Andrew, but lately, she'd been hearing dry tales about his adventures as well. She had always tried not to listen to gossip, but in this situation it all snowballed. In addition, Andrew had been very harsh about his daughter's marriage. He didn't like it all. Betty said, "If you're going to ruin everyone's mood, I want you to know. I'm going to ruin it for you. Julia is our daughter, and she doesn't need to know what's going on with you and me." In the shower, Andrew realized he'd already lost. He should back off and wait and think. But how he wanted to arrange the meanness so that his family and his daughter would not be born with this chip who once decided to teach him about life. In the middle of the feast, when they had already raised their glasses to their future family, the doors opened and Andrew entered the living room. His wheelchair stopped quietly by the doctor's table. "Good afternoon, everyone." Julia snapped out of her seat. "Daddy, it's about time. I thought you'd never come out to see us." She kissed Mill's father on the cheek, and Andrew thought a little. Betty smiled faintly. "But it's possible to be normal. Meet my husband, Andrew." Andrew gave a mock bow and suddenly heard, "Andrew." It was a voice he'd recognized from 1000. Slowly, very slowly, he raised his head and met his eyes with Jenna's. There was a heavy silence at the table. Betty asked confusedly, "I don't understand. Have you met my husband?" Jenna smirked. His heart was pounding frantically. "Not just acquainted. Your husband was once my husband." Julia and Tony looked at each other. Tony asked Mom, "Are you okay? Were you married?" "Before Daddy again. Had a son, though not for very long. When my husband got fed up with me and my illness, he decided to feed me to the wolves." Betty gasped. "No, it couldn't be. His wife is missing." "I know this story." Jenna continued to stare at the pale Andrew. "Andrew, what about you? Let's tell Betty what really happened, how you lied. You told me you were taking me to the Israeli clinic at the airport, but you drove me into the woods. You left me there in the winter and drove away. Do you remember how I screamed? I asked you to stop, and you ran away, bouncing in the snow." Julia looked at Jenna with eyes full of terror. Tony opened his mouth at all. "You couldn't close it." And Betty stretched out. "So that's it, is it? Missing in action. Then, Andrew stared at Betty and at Jenna. He was afraid to move, afraid because he could see the look in Jenna's husband's eyes. That doctor wanted to nail him. It had been a year. Betty peeked into her deputy's office. "What's Betty started? It's over already. Look. Julia was on the video call on her phone. She looked tired but happy. "Look, your grandmother's now." Tony and Julia left at once. David helped his son transfer to university, and the children left there quietly signed and learned to live with family. Andrew was sent to the very apartment he had once registered for himself. Betty promised to pay for his caregiver for the first time, but only on the condition that she never saw him again. "You know, you should thank God you're disabled. Otherwise, we'd have put you in the slammer." "Betty, how could you? We love each other. You're not confusing anything. Now we both know exactly why you married me. I feel sorry for you. You never carried true love in your heart. Without it, a man has lived his life for nothing. For what? Why did you do it all for? You did this only to find yourself alone and almost destitute. The law of the boomerang." David learned that he had become a grandfather only after an operation in which he was saving another life. More recently, he realized that life sooner or later puts everything in its place. Already after they visited Julia's parents, he, while walking in the park, heard a man, "Do not let go," missing with the judge on the bubble. Usually he never gave for booze. At most, he could buy beggars groceries. But now, for some reason, he turned around and was dumbfounded. In front of him stood the very man who had once been his friend, and then had set him up so badly. "What did you find out?" "Him, and he'd gotten himself in trouble." "That means you're living well." "I see. I am. You look like you deserve it." He took out a bill, put it in his ex-friend's hand. "Drink to me." And then he left. There was finally peace in my soul.